Las Vegas, and he's just putting up stickers for 30 Seconds to Mars, which no one had ever heard of. We'd only played 2 shows. One of those shows was exclusively to my aunt and my cousin in Santa Barbara. And then we go over to Las Vegas. We were playing the Hard Rock. It was like the first actual decent show. Opening, I think that show we opened for Puddle of Mud of all people. And then, yeah, the 2 bicycle cops dressed in neon yellow kind of pull us over, sit us down on the curb, handcuffed. And the punchline of the story is, they're like, "How old are you, man?" to Jared. And they look at his ID and they're like, "You're 35 years old, putting stickers up on telephone poles. You're going to go real far in life, my friend," they said to him. And he was practically engaged to Cameron Diaz at the time. And anyway, 30 Seconds to Mars went on to be a massive success musically, although not financially. As Virgin, the label, never paid them. But a lot of fans, but no payment from the label. And so they had to sue the label, and they made a documentary out of the lawsuit with the label. And they made more money from the documentary than from the music. But anyway, welcome to Tech News Around the World, where we tell crazy stories that you will never hear anywhere else. And there's no shortage of tech headlines to jump into. And yeah, we're 5 minutes into it already. So we came from the Politics from the Capitol's room, which is the only other room I really genuinely look forward to and hang out in religiously, because it's like Tech News Around the World. It's a brilliant deep dive into what's happening every day, everywhere, on the political angle. And I had no idea there was an election happening in Iran soon. And where else are you going to be able to hear from people on the ground who know what's really going on than here in Clubhouse, and specifically in, the political news from the Capitol's room, masterfully run by Justin and Jeff here on stage. And I would honestly, it's better than anything on TV. It's better than anything on any radio. There's nothing that can provide that. And God bless Clubhouse for enabling this. And God bless you guys for enacting it. And just, you're doing God's work, man. It's like I said, I would pay money.
Well, my friend, the news show. So we do a one at night with long form interviews. But the news show, I must say, we have to thank you and your community members, because you folks have given us kind of the blueprint here, and we've just taken it with Tyler's consent, made our little changes to it. And applied it to politics. And not only did we kind of get the idea from you guys, but also half of the community is made up of you folks. So we definitely want to thank Tyler. And what we do at the end of the show, Tyler will give us a tech headline that we kind of then go into deep in our show, and maybe either pick it up here or we just discuss the tech news here. But what I think is kind of cool is that the politics always interacts with technology. Just look at Nigeria with their Twitter,
Absolutely.
or India, or wherever else. So we get to do the hard politics, like the prime minister is dealing with these different factions because of X, Y, and Z, and he really fucked this up, so now he's trying to ban Twitter. And you guys can kind of go into the private sector, the tech company's response, what's going on, and it's right after our show. So I think that Tech News Around the World is the best news show, and we're just trying to bring up the quality so that it's something similar to what you have going here, Tyler.
Well,
Here.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a win-win. And like I said, stuff goes on in I learn more from your room. I mean, I love the stuff that we cover here, but I mean, because I don't know politics, I can just sit back and drink from the fire hose. And like you said, by the way, I like how you referred to it as like the private sphere, because, by the way, people in Washington, D.C. refer to everything outside of Washington, D.C. as the private sphere, which I learned by hanging out from my ambassador friends, where they're like, "Oh, the private." I'm like, "What do you mean the private?" "Oh, like industry, like companies, private companies."
People that make money and create jobs.
Yeah, I'm like, isn't that the whole fucking world? I think of I think of the world as private, and there's these little islands of, governance. And but when you live in government, you refer to everything outside of government as the private industry doing what it does. And then we need more bridge building between these two worlds, between metaphorically Silicon Valley and Washington D.C., or metaphorically, Silicon Valley and Brussels, or Geneva, or pick your political capital. And it's really interesting to my God, in the case of the U.S., there's quite a polarization between the geeks, who are quite, some of them are quite extreme libertarians, and they don't want any involvement from the government at all, of any kind, which is a bit ironic now. The biggest headlines, one of the biggest meta themes in tech and politics at the moment, is how the U.S. is now got these 5 big bills that are going to be smacked down on Wednesday, if I understand correctly, which Justin and Jeff can confirm. Um, and it's the kind of reckoning day is upon them. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out on Capitol Hill. But it's not only in the U.S., because in the past week or so, we've seen similar motions now from the U.K., the EU. China was ahead by a couple of months, as usual, with regard to cracking down on their big tech companies. And then Japan and India both made similar announcements in the past few days that they're going to start cracking down. And the real question is, is this a bizarre coincidence that these are all happening at the same time? And the answer is maybe not. Um, and there's the other. This ties into other big meta
And
narratives.
it's
Yeah,
real quick,
yeah.
Tyler, just to give you guys and your audience kind of very brief summary. There are 5 big tech antitrust laws that Tyler so kindly pointed out. And also, they are supported by the far right of the Republican House, which is the lower chamber of our Congress, and also the more establishment left of our Democratic House, which shows that there is bipartisan support. There is not support from the Republicans who are in the very, very cozy, big buddies with big corporations. The tax cutting Republicans like Kevin McCarthy. He said, "Oh no, this is a bridge too far, folks. We're going to give the government too much power to rein in these tech companies." I don't know if he thinks these tech companies don't have enough power, or if maybe the tech companies would act better than the government, which I think for the last decade, maybe 2 decades, you could say no, they wouldn't. But anyways, for your point, Tyler, what's going to happen is these bills are going to be voted on in committee, likely on Wednesday, like you said. And then after they get through committee, which they will, because they have overwhelming support, they will then go to the House floor for a vote if Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi deems so necessary. And then they will pass the House, very, very likely. And then that'll set them up for the Senate, where they may die, but if anything, if nothing else, it shows you how far the momentum has gotten from these things being talked about in behind closed doors to now in a week, 2 weeks, you could have a situation where they're ready to be voted on in the full House of Representatives, likely pass the full House of Representatives, and then be one vote away from being signed into law. So big tech better wake up, my friends.
Yeah, it's like I said, the day of reckoning is upon us, and they also, totally in concert with all of this. Did you just mention the new chairman of the FTC, Khan?
FTC, the new chairman, folks, this one's an
Yep.
interesting one. So basically, the reason why this matters is the legislation that's being voted on is to reform current antitrust laws, which will allow lawsuits to be brought against these companies by the federal government, by the state governments, that effectively could wind up breaking these companies up. Because there's a big debate whether or not current antitrust legislation allows for Apple, Google, Facebook to actually be broken up. So the government doesn't have the ability to kind of provide proper oversight, many would argue. Well, this new FTC commissioner sorry, chairwoman, she is absolutely brilliant, and she came to fame by writing a college paper that was nationally and internationally acclaimed for basically saying Current antitrust legislation is insufficient to regulating big tech. We need to update this legislation. We need to strengthen it. And then people believe, she didn't go this far, but people believe she is one of the strongest proponents of smashing these companies up. And she is now, why does this matter? What's the FTC? She is now in charge of the agency responsible for regulating antitrust violations. So this is all kind of coming together, to Tyler's point, where now you have a bunch of big tech hawks. And the last thing I'll say on this is, regardless of the merits or not, Tyler said you have a bunch of libertarians, wealthy people who basically just want to say, fuck you to big government. I want to keep my money. I really don't give a shit about the rest of the citizens. I don't want to pay taxes. Full stop. I don't want my company regulated. Full stop. Doesn't matter what they believe in. Doesn't matter about my fellow citizens. But also, when you have these big tech people come up and testify on Capitol Hill, this just shows you the dynamic that's kind of behind the scenes. And they then testify and they make these members of Congress look like fools. How do you think, not only the members of Congress, but how do you think the staffers behind the scenes take to that, to seeing their boss ridiculed time and time again in the news media because of a big tech hearing? They do not take to it well, and it kind of just, it's like salting a field. It just adds to the
I,
animosity.
I would maybe take a slightly different view on it. I think that so everyone saw when the big tech leadership was there and members asked questions that clearly showed that they were out of step. And so that pointed to a lot of people saying that the reason why more regulation doesn't pass is because members don't understand it. And if they understood it, they would regulate it. I personally don't think that's true. I think the reason why more regulation hasn't passed is because there's been so much investment in lobbying in order to prevent any public interest legislation from
Mm-hmm.
passing, particularly on privacy and taxes. But just to add one more layer of specificity here, so the bills are going to be voted on Wednesday in the
Hang on,
House of
Jeff.
Representatives.
Let me
Yeah,
simplify the point you
sure.
just made. So they're either shady or they're stupid. It comes down to that. And they, when the tech companies came to Capitol Hill, the big CEOs, Mark Zuckerberg, Tim Cook, and everybody, Google, Sundar Pichai, and the people from the Congress members of Congress were asking questions like, "How do I reset my password?" and just ridiculously stupid questions, and it made them look stupid. And then what you're saying is, I'm not so sure they're stupid. They're just very well funded by these tech companies, and they're running out the clock, and hence they're shady. So the real question is, are they shady or stupid? Go ahead.
But also, so all the campaign finance contributions are all public. You can look that up, and you can also look up what all the votes are. So there are databases out there where you can trace whether or not a member of Congress has voted against their constituencies. In that case,
Mm.
you had members of the Senate who maybe didn't have a lot of personal tech knowledge, but the committee staffers, like on Senate Commerce and House Energy and Commerce, they know their stuff for sure. And so the question is really about what can pass. A lot of the lobbying and efforts, a lot of times, like there was one bill that came up, for example, that would have required social media companies to have transparency for anyone who buys an advertisement that has political content. And ITIF, which is one of the big industry groups, came out and said that it was a travesty against the First Amendment, that people should be able to buy things anonymously, which after 2016 was interesting. So I don't know if we're going to see, all of these things moving forward, but the ones that they're voting on Wednesday that Justin mentioned, two of them are on conflict of interest. A third one is on, it would require them to refrain from a merger unless it can show the acquired company doesn't compete. The fourth one would require platforms to allow users to transfer their data elsewhere. So now you get into privacy issues. Is there a right to be forgotten and so on? And then there's a fifth bill that has already passed the Senate that would increase the budgets of antitrust enforcers in the US because, of course, the antitrust laws we have here go back to Teddy Roosevelt 100 years ago with physical industries like railroad and oil. So then the question is now, if you have these data firms, as you so rightly point out, Tyler, then where does it leave us?
Well, then it gets it gets a little more interesting because it could turn out that indeed they do start to put in some tough new policies and make some interesting moves that will ironically and somewhat cleverly almost sinisterly, um, like the GDPR does, uh, make it more difficult for future companies to get to the stage where these big companies are and sort of lock them in place. And that will be interesting to see. And there's now enough people on the inside who kind of are almost watching out for that, actually. I wonder it won't be so easy to do that because the first few times that these big companies got slapped with things that were intended to kind of minimize their power, the like GDPR, and then when you look closely, you realize, oh, wait a minute, hold on. But the real net long term effect of this is actually going to work in that big tech company's interest. Um, Even though the headline in the paper is, the politicians cracked down on the big tech company. And the reality is, no, they just made it harder for anyone. Now that big tech company has the financial means to comply and jump through all the big hoops that you're now putting in place around data privacy protections. Smaller companies don't have the luxury of being able to do that. And now you just made it very difficult for anyone to ever compete with that big tech company who can afford the teams of lawyers and everything to comply with all of this new regulation. So there's
And that's something that's very, very, very important, folks. Whether you like talking about government or not, I think that what Tyler just brought up is a theory of the case that is fundamental that everybody should really be aware of. So just to really dumb this down, you have a theory that government is here to provide regulations to help protect people, to help keep a healthy economy, and prevent companies from running amok. And certain regulations the government will make to kind of try and limit the power of big companies, just like Tyler said. However, if these regulations are not done well, what you have ultimately happen is you have these big, large companies lobby in favor of regulations. And they do so because of what Tyler said. It may hurt them a little bit in the beginning because they may need to change their business operations, their business model to comply with these things. But they have so much money that they can spend on lawyers, that they can spend on retooling their business, that ultimately they're going to not only be able to do it quickest, they're going to be able to do it in a way that is the most efficient. And the other companies that these regulations are intended to help, like the mid-size, the smaller tech companies, won't actually be able to change their business model to basically comply with these. So the net effect is you could have regulations, and this is throughout government, not only tech. You could have regulations aimed at hurting the big tech companies or the big companies in any sector that ultimately help them because of their monetary power. So I just wanted to highlight that,
An
Tyler.
example of that, Justin, could be if I follow on from you. An example could be IDing people, the requirement to ID everyone, right?
right. Oh, great
And
example, Sal.
Beautiful.
yeah, because we
Yes,
talked about that last week,
great
right? So
example.
that one,
That's a
that
perfect
one,
example.
yeah,
That could
go
Could
happen,
I
by
could
the
I
way.
weave in could I weave in a new data point?
Go, John.
So just to summarize the last couple of comments, we've got deliberate regulatory capture in order to raise the barrier to entry for new
Correct.
entrants.
Well said.
Watch the Facebook ad that just came out on the mainstream television media. It's fascinating because at the end of the ad, they put up 4 issues, one by one, and then 2 seconds fade to black, 2 seconds fade to black, 2 seconds fade to black, and then 1 second fade almost immediately. And the 3 issues are, I'm forgetting one of them, but content moderation. The second one was supporting elections. But the one that's half as long and is faded to start and fades very quickly is called data portability. Now they're bundling these issues, but subliminally diminishing the last one. Does data portability mean that the individual has a
Mm.
right to data portability or the platform? Think Apple and Facebook. So they may have shown their cards about how they want to bundle issues in regulatory reform.
And also, to add to John's point, if you look closely at the law, it actually says that this only applies to companies that are over, 50 million users and 600 billion market capitalization. So it excludes. That's what one argument is, that it's excluding all the other sort of manipulators in the market, including banks to Walmart to other big firms that may be let loose, while only targeting the three fangs, basically, the Apple, Facebook, etc.
Mm,
I want to pose a question to the stage.
go for it.
Um, in light of all this talk of regulation and crippling uh, the growth of tech companies, how do we feel about the announcement at NATO conference this week by the French president, where there's a push to try to have, I think it's something like 10, at least
Yes.
10
10
tech
companies
companies,
worth 100 billion. Yeah, it's
yeah,
that wasn't so much
in
NATO.
Europe.
That was called the new startup council, which was pioneered by Nicholas Zenstrom, who I guess I can consider a friend. I've had dinner at his house a few times. Nicholas Zenstrom did Skype, and before that, he did a Kazaa, which was like a competitor to Napster when there was a kind of an explosion of the P2P MP3 file sharing services. And
Kazaa was great.
Kazaa was, and it was illegal. So he shut it down and used the same technology to transfer voices through the internet through P2P instead of MP3 files. And then you had Skype. So he did Skype, made it wildly successful, sold it to Microsoft and then at eBay, and then bought it back, sold it again, and he made a killing every time. He's a true genius. And then he started Atomico, one of the world's best VC firms based out of London. Him and Matthias, who I also consider a good friend and who we go to dinner regularly in Stockholm. And those two gentlemen are absolutely brilliant. Long story short, Nicholas and interviewed Macron in Paris about a year ago, and it was a great interview. And they both share the same passion to make Europe, and Nicholas Zenstrom because he built one of the first big European tech companies with Skype, and it's been his personal passion and mission in life to uh, wave the flag that we can build big tech companies in Europe. And because when he tried to raise money for Skype, everyone ignored him, kind of laughed at him because he was trying to build a tech company in Europe. And he's like, all right, he's got a bit of a vengeance on this issue. And that's why he became a VC and he specifically only funds European entrepreneurs. And he's done incredibly well with that, by the way. And this is his, mission in life. And Macron in Paris also has this new mission. He wants France to be sort of the center of that European tech ecosystem. And they, share a similar vision to let's legitimize tech in Europe and build the future Googles and Apples and in Europe. So they met. Nicholas did the interview. You can watch it. It was, like I said, a year ago. And then they realized, hey, let's actually formalize a team to fulfill a very concrete stated mission of let's build 10 companies that reach $100 billion valuation. And to give you a context for how big that is, that's like Uber size companies. And let's make sure we can build 10 of these things in Europe in the next 10 years. And what policies do we need to put in place to make that happen? And those policy changes at the EU level, which are now starting to happen, and this is where it gets very personal for me, because when I arrived in Stockholm, as Johan and the other Swedes in the audience will tell you, and by the way, I should actually bring up Annika, because she actually plays a very personal role in this as well, because she wrote the manifesto version of this. She's normally sitting in the front row here. Where did she go? Where'd you go, Annika? Raise your hand if you're in the audience somewhere. Anyway, so in Stockholm kind of is one of the leading indicators, the canaries in the coal mine of the European tech ecosystem. And me kind of being one of the rabble rousers that bring the geeks together regularly, we decided, what can we do in terms of policy changes to help move the ball forward from the startup perspective? And we agreed on three things. We need to make it much easier to import in new talent from outside of the EU. We need to make it easier on stock options. And then lastly, we need a change in kind of the housing policies, which is unique to Sweden. That doesn't really apply elsewhere because Berlin has a fantastic rental market where Stockholm does not. So anyway, we were banging this drum for a very long time now, about 8 years, and there really has not been any changes made to it. And then Nicholas from Skype, Atomico, goes down, meets Macron in Paris, And then the EU Commission takes this very seriously because it's coming from Macron. And then they set this new agenda that they then force on all EU states. And guess what they're forcing? You got to fix your immigration to make it easier for these European startup founders to bring in immigrants. Hello, Sweden. Hello, Swedish Parliament members. We told you this is what we wanted for the past 8 years, and you did fucking nothing about it. Now you're being forced to do it by the EU. Second, we told you we want to fix the stock option issue. And again, you did jack diddly bupkis, you dumb motherfuckers. And now the EU is forcing you to do it. And we've been begging you to do it. And now you're being forced from the top down. We asked you very nicely from the bottom up for 8 years solid. And every time you came to any geek in every coffee meeting you ever had for the past 8 years, and you wasted everybody's time asking, how can we help? How can we help? How can we help? We as the geeks already coordinated and planned and said, here's our top 3 asks. And we all answer the same every time for 8 years. We're all in alignment. We're practically a union. And anytime a political member came and had lunch or breakfast or dinner or fika, which is coffee, we said the same thing every time. Here's our 3 demands every time. Unified.
And they didn't do it, Tyler?
And they just kept dragging their heels.
Was it because of far-right populism being anti-immigrant?
No. It was nothing. No, a great question, but no, it wasn't, honestly. Because this preceded that even, because that really didn't kick in until the Syrian, refugees started coming in. And this preceded that. So it wasn't that at all, honestly. The stock option one, they did do a report. Sweden moves very, very slow on these things, like they are with their cryptocurrency, their digital, what do you call it? The central bank digital currency, where China's like blazing full speed ahead. They're already paying, government employees with it. Sweden does what it does, and they're very careful. They're very considerate. They make sure everything goes perfectly because they're deathly afraid of making mistakes. Because if you make a mistake, you're kicked out, and the rest of the country will use your name as a joke for generations afterwards. And so Swedes are just terrified of ever making a mistake, where Americans are immune to embarrassment. We could give a fuck if we make a mistake. In fact, we celebrate our failures because that means you made some progress. But that's just not how Sweden works. So anyways, it takes them a bit longer to do things. But when they do things, they generally do it in a very optimized way. But anyways, they're now being forced to make these policy changes. They could have done them years ago, and now they're being pushed from the EU to do these changes. 2 of the 3, anyways. Let's cross our fingers on the 3rd. But that's more of a market issue that I don't know that it's good out that the housing one will always be a bit tricky in Sweden. But
you know that the housing issue is the one that actually has thrown us into turmoil and a vote of no confidence on Monday.
Oh, that's part of the reason
the housing.
Oh, is that part of the reason?
Yeah, the thing is that what they have this large quarrel in the government about is this with housing and the market pricing of these ones, because that has been heavily regulated and that has strangled the business. And
Correct.
It's very, very hard to build new buildings for flats, etc., because they have been constrained by rules and regulations.
Correct.
And that's what the vote regarding that one is the large debacle that actually led to the vote of no confidence on Monday.
Very interesting.
And I really like your insight into the Swedish political landscape. That was a marvelous summary. Thank you, sir.
Well, I thank you for the update on this whole vote of no confidence issue, which it's Swedish political news doesn't go outside of the Nordics generally, so we need you to give us those kinds of updates. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But in the meantime, shifting into, there's other political newses happening around the world. One of them is California launches a digital vaccine verification system built using the open source Smart Health Card framework with QR codes to show COVID-19 vaccine status, and the rest of the world saying, well, welcome to the club. Yeah, everyone's doing that. It's, COVID passport, big whoopee-doo. And Americans realize how touchy of an issue this is within America, because we've got, these hardcore libertarians. Y'all, get out of my backyard with your politics, son. I don't want your government getting all up in my ass with your politics. And America is quite unique in this way, that we're afraid of our government, which Swedes would have a hard time understanding, because they entirely just completely believe and adore their government, which Americans would find impossible to understand. So it's it makes it tricky when we do policies like this. And it turns out that the gentleman responsible for this is the kind of chief innovation officer for California that was brought in. He was formerly at Google, and before that, it was part of YouTube, which is part of Google, and prior to that, at Blogger, which was also part of Google because they bought Blogger from Evan Williams. And so that gentleman, and I have a lot of mutual friends in common, a lot of geek friends in common who are all congratulating him on Twitter now that this is passed. And so apparently he follows me on Twitter, no less. So I'm just starting a little Twitter thread. His name's Rick Clow. And so we'll invite him in to see if he can give us a little additional insight while we go into the further headlines. He might even join us today. Who knows? So let's get on to the other headlines. So, and whenever we get a chance, I'll send him the link to this room. Stripe employees.
Hey, Tyler.
Yes.
Just a little about that because it's kind of a space I'm in right now.
Okay.
From the European perspective, obviously there's the European system that's been rolling out. There's the deadline for the vaccination part is the 1st of July, but there's also the other part of it is the test result certificate that would be deadline is the 15th of August. So it's quite nuanced because in Sweden, for instance, they're opting to use the bank ID to be able to get it, but that's only like 70% of the population, and then with the test results, 50% of the people who are trying to get access to kind of these certificates that are now basically just paper-based and pretty much illegal and really easy to fake, 50% are foreigners who needs these certificates, and obviously bank ID means diddly squat. So there's a big issue. So I'm not sure how they're going to solve these things. So we're talking with the authorities about this, and they're really just scratching their heads, not really sure how they're doing it, going to solve that. There's all the other crazy stuff going on because they're creating this system, two separate systems, one for vaccinations and one for test results. That doesn't make much sense. So it's really fascinating to follow kind of they're kind of in the dark trying to figure out how to create this architecturally from a technical perspective.
Yeah, and there's another interesting twist to this that I'm sure Justin's aware of, and that is with Ron DeSantis declaring that vaccine passports will not be allowed in the state of Florida. There are movements to change the name of what these are from vaccine passports to anything other than vaccine passports. And the real issue is, and like you acknowledge, I mean, Australia and the airlines and the cruise lines, they're all developing their vaccine passports in one form or another. The issue from a tech standpoint is interoperability, free flow of the data, so that you can easily go from one to the transfer your data from one to the other. So if you're boarding a ship or boarding a plane or entering a country, you can use whatever they want.
And to really put a bow on this, back to Tyler here, if I were a betting man, and I am a betting man, coincidentally, I would bet on Ron DeSantis.
Chicken fights don't count. By the way,
I would bet on Ron DeSantis being the next nominee for the Republican Party of President of the United States. So that goes to Tyler's point about the great divide in America about, government involvement, because he, as John just said, is on the other side saying this is a grave violation of public rights and all this bullshit. So he's probably the next presidential candidate for the GOP.
I was thinking you would probably reach that conclusion, Justin. Totally.
So on this digital vaccine pass, Faraz just sent in a tweet that Lufthansa, to allow check-in with digital vaccine pass, Germany started issuing QR codes for those who are fully vaccinated last week. Thank you for that, Faraz. I just tweeted that out. Retweeted Faraz's tweet to the Tech News Twitter account at TNATW, which for you kids with the high IQs, you noticed that is the first letters of tech news around the world. If you can figure out how that coincidence happened, please send us a DM. We're trying to figure out how that amazing coincidence worked out. The Twitter account, TNATW, is the first letters of the name of this room, Tech News Around the World. And Faraz shared his tweet And we got notified because he included our Twitter account as part of his tweet, and you can do that too. And if you send in a good tweet, we will retweet it to our ever-growing list of now about 3,000 beautiful followers. And you can be one of the beautiful followers too by following that Twitter account and following the Tech News Club by clicking on the title of this room and seeing all the upcoming events that we have. But back to the news. What else do we got? The big stories going on in the tech sphere today is that YouTube is rolling out picture-in-picture support for YouTube Premium users on iOS and plans to launch the feature for all iOS users in the US. Thank God for that. Picture-in-picture. South Korea has become the global center for digital sex crimes as cases of illegal filming and distribution of images rose to 7,000 in 2020, up 70% from 2029. South Korea's cutting-edge technology has abetted a wave of digital sex crimes targeting young women and girls. TechCrunch has a story. It's also this is really weird how much coverage this story is getting from TechCrunch, The Register, The Hill, Financial Times, and others. And on the TechCrunch version, well, the TechCrunch version is a bad link. That's really weird. It goes to the Ukrainian story. The Financial Times story, I will tweet out so that everyone can see it. But in fairness, it is paywalled, so you might need a subscription to that one. Other big stories going on in the tech sphere at the moment is Microsoft and at least a dozen startups are testing non-conducting liquids to cool servers in data centers where almost half of the power is used for cooling. And this would reduce the incredible amount of power used in data centers. And that would be very cool. No pun intended, if they could come up with these new type of liquids to help liquid cool their data centers. China is ramping up scrutiny of its tech companies. Experts say its antitrust regulator lacks resources and only had a staff of about 50 people as of March. That's according to the Financial Times. But it has been well known and reported regularly recently, that China is ramping up scrutiny of the tech companies on all fronts. Perhaps it's assumed because Jack Ma's company, Ant Financial, it all started with that, honestly, from the outside perspective. And if there's an insider who knows otherwise, please jump up on stage and let us know. But just to backfill for everybody on how this mega narrative has developed and spilled over globally. China has two main mobile payment systems. One's called Alipay, one's called WeChat Pay. WeChat Pay is run by Tencent. WeChat is sort of like WhatsApp, but way, 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 way more. It can do everything from Tinder to Uber and everything else, and buying stocks. It's like 50 apps rolled into one, like a Swiss Army knife. And then you've got Alipay, run by Alibaba. Alibaba got so big that they proactively split it into a separate company called Ant Financial, which is itself tremendously huge. And the Alipay app is so popular that it spread way beyond China, all throughout Asia as a preferred payment method, even here in Thailand. And then they were planning the Alipay IPO 4 months ago or so, when we started doing tech news around the world. And that IPO magically got postponed, de-shelved, iceboxed, 86th, as we say, cinder blocked. And it turns out that the CCP decided that ain't going to happen. And this was, for context, the world's largest IPO in the history of financial IPOs. And very confusing. And next thing you know, Jack Ma, the CEO, founder, had really been nowhere to be seen for multiple weeks, about 2 months. There were starting to be rumors that he had died in a, Beatles-ish Where's Paul kind of, conspiracy theories started running wild, that he had died, and then he assumedly was forced to make a public statement that he had not died and had been not been killed, that he's okay. And we now have heard an update in the last week, as Cal reported, that his co-founder is reporting that he's taken up oil painting, and he's enjoying a very nice life of laying low, as they say in China. And by the way, that has led other large tech companies, CEOs and founders in China, notably the two biggest, fastest growing companies in China, TikTok and Pinduoduo's founders are both stepped down and resigned and laying low. And that, my friends, is truly bizarre indeed. Those are two of the fastest growing companies in the history of the planet. And the CEOs simultaneously stepped down to, just contemplate about life, just think about things. We were building the fastest growing companies in history, but you know what? I think we're just going to kick back and lay low, sit back, sip some iced teas, maybe play some, um, Chinese card games, little Go,
Maybe
little,
they'll come in on the Clubhouse how to
yeah, maybe,
paint
yeah, they can start coming in
room, you know, the
Clubhouse.
club, yeah,
Just
and
shoot
just kind
some
of
shit in Clubhouse for a bit, got
They're
plenty.
gonna they're gonna make they're gonna make NFTs, Tyler, and sell them in the digital art gallery they're building.
Yeah, whatever,
And
whatever.
I would
yeah,
argue,
yeah, that's
they
actually good.
don't want to be drinking tea.
You're mixing up your communist countries, my friend, my comrade. But
Sorry, I apologize.
the the interesting bit though is that China is indeed now fully, very openly cracking down on the big tech companies. And this headline from the Financial Times today is just one of a continuation of the drama about China ramping up its scrutiny of the big tech companies, and was at first minimizing their powers. And I wonder, as an outsider who claims ignorance on this issue, but from the outside, it seems that the government was starting to question that these big big tech companies could function as a sort of existential threat to the government in some sense. And I imagine, in full fairness, I wonder if the U.S. government feels the same way about the big tech companies in the U.S., which is not a coincidence that the U.S. is having this big, big moment on Wednesday with these 5 new big tech bills, also so very similarly aimed at reducing the strength and monopoly tendencies of the big American tech companies. And we find ourselves in a really interesting time when these massive big tech companies are now being kind of throttled by their respective governments. Anyway, so that's what's going on at the moment.
One government disappears the leaders, the other just regulates them, though. So I think that that's an important distinction.
Interesting distinction. Yeah.
An interesting thing is here, but what do you think? What do they think? Do
Who?
they think that a social platform could tamper with an election, for example, or why would it see it as
Who do you mean they?
the governments in the US and China? I was trying to get referred to the last
Well,
election, the president election.
let's turn this to Justin and Jeff. It's an interesting point, because indeed the social, it's very well understood that the social media platforms play now a significant role in election outcomes, do they not? And
Yeah.
Yes.
in multiple aspects, both in visibility and kind of marketing, but also in shaping the narratives and the misinformation campaigns, which may or may not be fueled by kind of adversary regimes, and that's according to the Bray, the head of the FBI, the head of the intelligence agency of the UK, and the head of Facebook's cybersecurity themselves have all said precisely that, and they actually all precisely name the Kremlin as the largest contributor to those misinformation campaigns. Justin?
Yeah, so the big debate here, and to pull this way back out, right? It's how can the U.S. government isn't the CCP government, right? For better or worse. In some cases, that means we move more slowly. In other cases, it means we value human rights. But the question here in the United States, because we don't have that authoritarian power with one swift stroke of the pen, we can basically throw all these people in jail. What we have to do is balance human rights, balance the document called the Constitution with enforcement regulations and ways to kind of tamp down on that. To Tyler's point, the 17, yes, the United States, folks, has 17 different intelligence agencies, but all 17 of them signed on to a letter basically saying the Kremlin, Russia, our enemies, were using our social media platforms to not only interfere with the election, but to do so in a way that stoked hatred between different factions in the United States. So that would be posting anti-vax information to rile up the far, far left and the far, far right. That would be posting things about the BLM movement, again, to rile up the far, far left and to rile up the far, far right. The debate is going to be, how does the United States change our laws to potentially hold these tech companies liable. And I'm not going to get into the legal jargon, but it really does come down to one of two approaches. You have Clarence Thomas, a Supreme Court justice, leading conservative thinker and voice, which, again, you should not have those two statements in the same sentence. A Supreme Court justice should be impartial. However, his view, and he wrote this in a dissent for a case, is that essentially Facebook and Twitter are so large and so powerful that they need to be considered the public square, i.e., they need to be protected by First Amendment right
Common
and
carrier.
ultimately not regulated at all. And then on the other side, you have people who have a totally different opinion and who want to see this law called Section 230 repealed, which in effect takes away immunity for these large tech companies and holds them liable for the content published on their platforms. So how does this relate to what Tyler's saying? Let's assume that Section 230 is repealed, and nobody knows what's going to happen. But let's say that it is repealed. If that were to happen, let's say you have information from the Russian government that's clearly propaganda. The FBI traces it back, holds Facebook responsible for allowing this shit on their platform. You could have crippling lawsuits where ultimately people blame Facebook for promoting this material that leads to a mass shooting or something of the sort. And ultimately, these lawsuits end up crippling the company and potentially bankrupting them. So that's kind of what's going on here in the US. And because you have these two divergent views, which to summarize are make it so that Facebook cannot remove content or make it so Facebook has to remove nearly everything that's problematic. There's no path forward, and it's going to be a debate here in the United States for years to come, maybe even the next decade.
But in the
Justin,
impact,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, I'll just go quickly and
Yeah.
say that the impact that they have on elections can absolutely no longer be denied, and their capacity to produce violence can no longer be denied. And you don't even have to just look in the U.S. the sixth. You can also look in Myanmar and other places where the deployment of these platforms was supposed to lead to, societal integration, world peace, but they were also just weaponized. And so, to Justin's point about pulling it all the way out, I mean, yes, in the US, the right to criticize the government, and to what you said, Tyler, before about the ways that Americans view their government versus Swedes, the right to criticize the government is sacred here. But the issue is that the openness of that system has been exploited against us. And the reason why is because these platforms that we invented here have really been exploited and turned against us. Now, these things aren't new. Misinformation, disinformation, hate speech aren't new. They've always been around. They've always produced violence. The difference is just now that they spread with
At
much more
scale.
ferocity,
Yeah.
much more quickly. And to your point, it's not even necessarily should they be common carriers. It's should they be like a publisher.
Right.
And that you can't exactly just repeal 230 wholesale and make them liable without having real free speech implications. So there's a certain responsibility here on the individual to be discriminating in how they use these things. But then the question of the platforms is a very important and tricky one, because this playbook of this misinformation, disinformation, I mean, this stuff happened in republic after republic in the
Yep.
USSR days.
Yep.
And now it's just happening on these platforms against us. And it's important that we have these conversations and figure out what to do. Antitrust is only one piece, but not the whole piece.
But now
And
one second, John. We all don't also know. We now have an indication of what actually does happen if it does get repealed, because India just took away Twitter's similar protections in India last week, and it's already turned into a shit show in the last 3 days, where now they've made the managing director of Twitter India forced them to go down to the police station to appear as being to make a statement of kind of personal responsibility over some things that just happened in India. First, India warned Twitter, you have to do what we say and comply. Twitter was moving a bit more slowly in complying than India would like. India said, okay, you little bastard, now you've lost your protections. Now you're going to be personally responsible for anything that gets said on your platform, essentially removing their version of Section 230. And then sure enough, something happened on the platform. India says, that's your fault, Twitter. Somebody spread some false information on your platform. You're personally responsible. Your managing director must now come down to the police station, make a personal statement. And now it's concerning whether or not that person is going to be apprehended. And that all happened within a matter of days. Go ahead, John.
And that could happen in the U.S.
That's
So
the point.
Tyler, you're
Yeah.
you're really putting a fine point on
Yeah.
this, and I wanted to just
It's
say you're a
it's not
gentleman
hypothetical or
and a
theoretical.
scholar.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, and one way of thinking about it is that social media has become the new platform for psyops in political contests, and skills at psyops on social media has created a new form of asymmetric warfare.
Well, and it's not a
Well said.
surprise then that we see this headline that just came out a few hours ago. Although, if you've been following us
Taylor.
here at Tech News Around the World every day, then you're going to have a nice, good laugh at how slow the rest of the media is at figuring out what we've been figuring out as it was happening in real time. But here we are. The mainstream media is now figuring this out, a week later. Coup is selling itself as a Twitter substitute in Nigeria. Well, Jesus, Wally. Yeah, if you've been following us here regularly, you you heard this in real time from people in India and in Twitter and in Nigeria, on the ground in Nigeria. The Indian microblogging app has built a partisan audience in India by supporting government restrictions on social platforms. And we covered this, like I said, a week ago, as it was actually happening in real time, where Coup is an Indian copy of Twitter that plays very friendly with the Indian government, and it's local, so the government can control it. And so it doesn't even try to not play friendly with the government. It knows it must play friendly with the government, and it does. That's why the government loves it, and that's why when Twitter started getting in hot water with India, magically, simultaneously, at the exact same day that the Indian government sent 6 or 7 large gentlemen in uniforms down to Twitter's HQ to have a nice little chat about why Twitter had put a warning message on the official Indian government's tweets. And one must wonder why you need 6 or 7 gentlemen in uniforms to come down and have that conversation to ask that simple question. That same day, Coup, Twitter's competitor native to India, received $30 million in funding from Tiger Global and our friend Chamath Palihapitiya and Balaji, and who are both, Balaji's Indian and Chamath is Sri Lankan, but in any case, Coup just got $30 million of funding. And I'd have to say, it's interesting coincidence of the timing on that. And then this headline says, again, what we already knew is when Nigeria banned Twitter a few days later, again, about a week ago, Coup, being the regime-friendly version of Twitter, who, of course, complies on demand, approached Nigeria to say, hey, we are a very government-friendly version of Twitter, and we realized you just banned Twitter. How would you like to join Coup? And so the headline again is Coup is selling itself as a Twitter substitute in Nigeria. The Indian microblogging app has built a partisan audience in India by supporting government restrictions on social platforms. And that indeed, it's a really interesting startup angle, positioning, framing. Now that Twitter and Facebook and other social media platforms are having so many headaches and dealing with so many governments, Russia, very notably, is having a lot of headaches with YouTube and others, that there's now a market opportunity to position yourself as a startup as, hey, we don't give you anyone any beef at all. We don't have American employees who are telling us, as Facebook now has, because when Facebook complies with India to take down content that the government doesn't like, the American employees at Facebook do a signature writing campaign to tell Mark Zuckerberg, don't take down that content the government doesn't like. That's freedom of speech. They have freedom of speech in that country. You should not be taking that down. You're, aiding kind of authoritarian sentiments by even removing these, this content in a country that has freedom of speech. Why are you doing this? We're Americans. We're telling you, you're an American company. You're compromising your values. Well, India has 1 billion people. That's a lot of that's a lot of masala. That's a whole lot of basmati rice, my friends. That's a whole lot of naan. And Facebook is caught between their values of their employees and the future financial salaries of their employees, the future revenue for those employees, and finding themselves in a very difficult situation. Yet Ku doesn't have that problem. Ku says, "Whatever you say, boss. You're the boss. We are just going to do whatever content you like, and if there's content you don't like, you're the boss. We take it off right away, boss." And that's a really interesting new dynamic that they'll be curious to see how Ku spreads, and how well they'll do when they get to North Korea. So other headlines. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, Ku's also got Tiger Global behind them, right?
yeah,
And it's Tiger Global, so connected across all the African continent and the Asian
that's
continent. So
fully,
you
yeah,
can just see the introductions that they'll make, right?
yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I mean, global's in the name. Yeah. Um, I
Tyler,
yes, Brian.
do you think that in this environment where there's a lot of regulations of big tech, do you think that Europe will use this opportunity to regulate American companies so that they
Yes. That's
have
whoa. Hey,
the thing you're
hey
talking
now, Brian.
about the 10
Hey yo.
companies?
Hey,
So,
Brian. Good question. And
hey,
by the way, they are in the process of doing exactly that. And Joe Biden just met with them at the G7 in Cornwall, UK, where it was reported as one of the many things they discussed. Biden told them, take it easy on our American tech companies. That's our job. That was the headline about 48 hours ago. So indeed,
yeah,
the EU is trying to do it. They take a slightly different narrative, which is we're protecting Europeans from misuse of their data, right? We're not actually trying to minimize you as a big tech company. The American government is saying, actually, no, we are trying to minimize you as a big tech company. They're very overt about their intentions. I would argue, I think the EU does also want to reduce the power and strength and monopolyist, kind of powers of these big tech companies, but they don't frame it that way.
exactly.
They frame it as data protection, et cetera, yada yada. And I know this because I've been in endless meetings with said politicians, and when you get down to the second or third T, they start saying things like, why isn't there a European Google or Facebook or Amazon? And what do we need to do to make that happen? And geez, maybe we should make it harder for those big American companies to do business in Europe. And so,
Alex,
yeah,
it's Mahogany again. I was the one who asked about Macron's statement, and that's the red thread that I saw,
yeah,
right? If there's an ambition to have 10 billion dollar or billion euro companies by 2030,
100
part of that,
billion. Yeah, 10, $100 billion companies. Yeah.
yeah, 100 billion. That means you might find some regulations that make it more easy to grow those tech companies in Europe than to have the American companies expand. I'm done speaking.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So,
Well, I just wanted to real quick, Tyler. The U.S. lawmakers do all want to increase data and privacy, and I won't go too far into the weeds. But what you have happening here is there is a freedom of speech issue and regulating against foreign actors interfering in our domestic affairs through big tech. There is a data privacy regulation issue going on here, and then there is an antitrust issue going on here. The politics in the United States, to zoom this way back out, is so jumbled right now, so broken. And we also have a lot of stuff we need to do. We need to recover from coronavirus. We need to update our infrastructure. We need to change our energy system around to deal with climate change. That ultimately, all of this hatred, and it is hatred. I don't like to use inflammatory language, but this is the accurate language. It is hatred by our lawmakers towards big tech, and I think rightfully so, because of how much big tech has screwed up in our society. It's all kind of getting pushed into, and now I'm a PR guy. This is the PR stuff. It's all this momentum is getting pushed onto the legislation that can move next. And like Tyler has described ad nauseum, that is antitrust legislation. So what you're going to see happen, whether it be now or over the next 4, 6, 8 years, you're going to see antitrust legislation pass. You will eventually see data privacy regulation pass, and you will eventually see something with regards to free speech pass. And but ultimately, it's just all being focused, as Tyler so rightly pointed out, all of this animosity and all of this energy is being focused on antitrust. And the reason why I'm so confident that legislation will move, whether it be in 2 or 4 years, is because this is a political maxim and a truth in most countries, but definitely in the United States Congress. You will 100% get legislative action on something that both parties equally hate. And that is Facebook, that is Twitter, that is big tech.
It's an interesting point also for the non-Americans who join, which is the vast majority of people here due to the magic of Clubhouse. And just to point out, it's worth noting, and as Justin will confirm, it's very unique in 2020, 2021 to get Republicans and Democrats to agree on anything. So the fact that they are in alignment on this says quite a bit, does it not, Justin?
Tyler, you're 100% right. The only things we agree on are we need to do something about coronavirus. We need to do something about the CCP government, which is actively committing genocide according to our government, and we hate big tech. So that is very, very notable, folks. It's coming. Just be patient.
So
Hey,
yes, John.
Justin, this is John. Quick question for Justin.
Sure.
If you backed out the profiteering off of conflict that appears to be embraced by Facebook, if you back that out of the big tech sector, do you think that would change the animosity of the political infrastructure to big tech?
How could
Yes.
they do that?
Yes. I think John's point is Facebook and the way Mark Zuckerberg has kind of handled this PR stuff, and he's done so literally the worst way possible. It has kind of tainted the whole industry. And now what you have happened, you have where there are legitimate concerns, folks, around Google, there are legitimate concerns, folks, around Apple. Essentially, the reason why there is so much impetus to move legislation is because of the fuel that Facebook has given to this fire. And it just so happens that everybody in Congress, and when I say everybody, folks, I mean the far right Tea Party, has co signed onto these bills with a quote unquote liberal coastal elite in David Cicilline. So you have literally the opposing political factions get behind this. And I would argue, to John's point, it wouldn't be possible without the animosity that is felt universally throughout the ideological spectrum here in the United States towards Facebook.
So I got a bunch of headlines on some interesting topics here that I'll run through, and then we'll circle back through from our brilliant brain trust on stage from around the planet, covering lots of geographies and professions, as we're known to do. Off the top here, Google just opened their. Speaking of the big tech, Google just opened its very first store in the Chelsea neighborhood of Manhattan. And you can now see, I will tweet, I just tweeted it out from the Tech News Twitter account if you want to get a look at it. There's a YouTube video. It looks quite beautiful. Certainly taking a page out of the Apple Store, but doing their own thing.
But here in the U.S., we had Microsoft open a ton of stores and then subsequently close them. So we'll see if
good
it's just a
context.
flash,
Indeed.
in the pan.
Indeed, Microsoft, clearly inspired by Apple stores, made their own Microsoft stores that kind of fell down in a blaze of glory, and we'll see if the Google stores do the same. It's not a coincidence that Google chose the Chelsea area of Manhattan to do their first store. They have one of their largest campuses is kind of right there next to
Samsung
the store.
and Sony tried their own stores. I don't
Yeah.
see this going anywhere, but we'll see.
Yeah, but Google does have a growing list of hardware now that they've acquired. They have Nest and Fitbit and all kinds of gadgets and phones of their own, and the Android phones and their own Pixel phones and laptops. And they're going to be getting into, VR and AR, and I can see that it could be very useful. It'd be really interesting to see if they include a Genius Bar-like concept, which is incredibly difficult to manage, but
Each time these stores, just a little context to
yeah.
Evan's point, each time these guys did this, they clearly wanted to show off their brand and and how their products work, products worked with each other and their ecosystem. And frankly, in the US, Best Buy did it for them. So they found a cheaper model to do it, to scale. So they keep a few stores open maybe, but that's just showroom. and the actual selling goes through because they basically put a shop inside the Best Buy, and that's literally what we literally went to Microsoft with the offer and said, you don't need your stores, we can do it for you,
And
and so
Best Buy,
now.
Best Buy is amazing. Yeah, Kai, you know this better than I, but Best Buy is just an amazing store now with all the different hosted retail partners like Apple and others.
Yeah, and sometimes you offer that they put their own people on there, right? Which reduces the staff cost for Best Buy. But Apple insists that they put one or two of their own people. They insist they get the front space, and this might be why they want to try and open their own because of the power that Apple might have over Best Buy. So they're always trying to leverage space, but the challenge always becomes a business model challenge with these small stores is foot traffic and the rents they have to pay for it but post pandemic maybe some of the rents are cheap, right? So as you get less you just have a little bit of a correction there, so you never know, they want to control their own experience. But I think competition, to Tyler's point, I do think that timing is different now. Competition is really heating up, and obviously they'll go to Best Buy and say, hey, can we have prime position, can we put our own genius people in there, and Best Buy is going to say, no, we have Geek Squad, so it starts to get hard, but it's going to be interesting. They have to showcase the ecosystem. I think that's key.
Cal, one question, and maybe somebody in the audience is a commercial real estate expert. I'm wondering if the timing of this is in some way related to a downturn of the price of commercial real estate in some sense, but also the idea that these very big digital first cloud driven companies, which Amazon, Apple, Google, these are big cloud based companies that now are building brick and mortar locations. And very notably, Amazon just announced this past week that in addition to acquiring the whole Whole Foods brand and company and franchise, they now have built their own full scale 36,000 square foot supermarket, which very interestingly will allow for people to return their Amazon returns if they have purchased an item from Amazon they're unhappy with, and even more interestingly, might become the physical embodiment of their Amazon health initiatives. And that's where things get very interesting, because both Amazon and Google in recent days have announced incredibly ambitious aspirations of, one must assume, taking over medical and health in the US, and that these physical locations will play a role in those. And that's why you might start seeing these cloud companies needing to build physical locations.
It's pretty. Amazon's pretty
I,
funny. They have their own retail bookstore now,
Right.
and in the U.S. and I've been in one recently. It's all basically the most popular, trending products on
Yeah.
Amazon are sold in
One
person.
other point. Amazon also in London. Cal, have you gone and seen it yet? Their what do they call it? Beauty shop. Um, for like a
I haven't gone down to London. No,
but
I,
what's
I live in
it,
yeah, it's
one
a good,
interesting
yeah.
point about that is these companies, like these huge data driven companies, you might even call them data companies, Google and Amazon and Facebook, etc., are going to start opening their own stores because they want to deeply understand and test at the store level their most groundbreaking technologies before putting them out, and selling them to store. They're going to start making retail solutions, and then you sort of need your own store to beta test that stuff. And that's why we assume Amazon's doing, their own hair salon in London, and partly why Google will in some ways benefit by having their own retail brick and mortar location in Chelsea. And so it's very interesting because Google. Yeah, go ahead.
there's a part of me that's feeling like they might be taking a page out of the Birchbox or Warby Parker book, whereby they want to provide an additional channel for, I mean, to your point, you get better customer awareness around data, what they're touching, what they're liking, what they're asking about in the store, but
Oh,
also giving, like, using the store as a showroom more
Yep.
than anything else too,
Yep.
to build brand affinity
Yep. Well,
from
also,
then.
yeah, but Anne Marie, I mean, we know in the Amazon case, they said in this 36,000 square foot supermarket, for example, there's no staff in the entire supermarket because they can track your eyes on everything and they know every item you have in your basket and you just casually walk out and you get, you pay without even interacting with anybody. And so that's where things get very, very, very interesting
Yeah,
is
if you think about the groceries, the model that is still very physical. You've got the Vivek Shankaran running the Safeways and everything. He's doing good work to try and make them relevant, like all the big supermarkets in the US, other than Walmart,
right.
all the grocery stores.
But
But here's the thing: what Amazon's going to be able to do, if you reduce the real estate, let's say by real estate costs by, let's say, 20-30%, right? And then you have a really, really strong cloud-based model, e-commerce model where you've got, like you said, the returns, and you got a seamless service around that. Plus the fact now you have no labor, no staff cost, right? I mean, that's a big cost, right? And then you kind of work that through. You start to have a very profitable grocery model that takes on all these other guys. So they have good timing on this.
yeah, but there's also very innovative stuff that can be tested in the background. For example, friends of mine, Ola, fantastic technology out of Stockholm called Spotify. Well, they used to be called Spotify for Business. They now call themselves Soundtrack Your Brand. And because it's a partnership with Spotify, and what they do is when you walk into a Starbucks or many retailers now that they've partnered with, that retail location can see the Spotify playlists of everybody in the store and generate a playlist in real time dynamically based on the preferred songs of everyone in that store at that time and play the most ideal song at that moment that will convert into the best experience for those people in that store at that moment. And so it gets far more interesting than that. The camera stuff that is in these stores, and you better believe there will be cameras in this Google store. And the question is,
This is fucked up.
welcome to our world, Justin. And now you know why.
And you flick it to the other side, it actually makes the experience
Yeah,
good.
no, it's
So,
proven.
and physical will
I'll
only
ping
work if
Ola
you
in.
make the
He's a
experience
dear
good.
personal friend, and
Tyler,
yes. Yeah,
just
but
quickly,
the data,
coming back to
by the way, Cal, I mean, they've done the tests, before they got into their later stages of fundraising, to test this theory. If we could do this, would it translate into higher purchases? It does. And
And
so
it
now
probably does. Yeah.
so of course
Yeah,
it does. So
exactly.
it's the easiest sale in the world to the stores. Like, hey, do you want to increase your sales by 10%? And they're thinking, how are you going to do that? Well, let me show you something. Bada boom, bada bing. Of course they want that. There's it's guaranteed ROI essentially. Let me just also point out what can be done with cameras. And like I said, in the Google store, you better believe there's going to be more than a few cameras in that store. And what is now able to be detected with cameras will blow your mind. And we've said it here in other contexts, but just for those who might be new, with cameras and microphones, we'll do cameras first. They can detect the gender of somebody from a camera. Yeah, you can understand that. That's not so hard. They can detect age quite accurately with the camera. Sure, fair enough. They can also detect if it's a high quality camera and if it gets close enough to your iris, even, right? Like if you're standing in front of one of the new computers with a good camera, like a new iMac, or even the new phones that you hold up in the store, right? The latest versions of the phone have upgraded cameras, and these new cameras, specifically in the iPad Pro, has a remarkably good camera that is able to detect, not in addition to the gender and age of the person looking at the device, if they may have had a concussion or vision disorders or have obesity or Parkinson's disease, if they have depression, PTSD, autism, or eating disorders, if they are an extrovert or introvert or high in curiosity, if they have consumed recently alcohol, tobacco, cocaine, MDMA, or cannabis, just to name a few things that all of these data collecting companies will now have access to due to cameras. And it goes far beyond that with microphones and other sensors. So you can now start to understand why Google, as a data company, might want to test out what's possible in a physical brick and mortar store that they can't really tell many people about, but will then eventually productize and make available to everybody else.
Tyler, one
Yes.
question though. Like these cameras also, I mean, product placement in a supermarket shelf is so it's an art, right? It's a science
Yeah.
where they actually place certain objects at certain this type of sort of real-time measurement, could that be also be
Optimized.
Google's? Yeah, so I'm
Check
just wondering
this
whether
out.
Google's
We had a
Amazon's using that to sell.
we had a headline about 10 days ago, 12 days ago, of precisely this, where there were now cameras in a supermarket shelf. I recall it being in Dubai, where they increased sales of Kellogg. It was a Kellogg. They put it in the cereal aisle around which cereal they could improve the sales on based on the eye tracking of the individual in the store. So, for example, this is a well-known thing in digital e-commerce where you have eye trackers. This company Toby in Stockholm, who really pioneered it 20 years ago, my friend John, and eye trackers are used in e-commerce all the time. And apps use eye trackers in your laptops all the time. But the idea of using it in a retail shelf to see which cereal box you look at and then grab and then put in your shopping cart, oh boy, does that become very interesting data indeed. And they A/B test 3 different boxes of Kellogg's cornflakes, and they find out, this box, had better eye tracking time. And you start to see how eye tracking can be used in an incredibly wild way in brick and mortar, physical purchases on shelves. Yeah. Welcome back, Dr. Francine Hardaway.
Just to
Hey,
just to clarify.
oh,
Oh,
sorry,
sorry.
Paul. No, Cal, I just wanted to. I was thinking while you were talking earlier about the retail space and Best Buy, and back in the day, I'm probably dating myself, but since you just mentioned Tyler, this goes back a long time, like 15, 20 years ago, and I suppose it'd be about 2003, 2004. I was working at that time for the world's largest architecture firm in the health and education space, and they were doing quite a bit of retail at the time. And there was and I can't remember the name of it, but it was a Sony test store. You guys might know it. They had one in Beijing and one in Shanghai, and they were actually using technology back then to track how, like, if it was
Anna Marie, your mic cut out, but
a
yeah,
T-shirt
go ahead.
on a hanger.
Yeah.
Someone picked up a T-shirt on a hanger, how long they held the hanger for, and if they put it back or they took it with them to the front. And so I think in China, even for grocery retail, they've been like sort of pioneering this,
Indeed, they have. Yep.
yeah, personless
Yep.
interaction and transactions. And everything could be, you guys, like Demolition Man. If Amazon's really going to play through on what they really want, everything's a Taco Bell. So everything becomes an Amazon.
Yeah, and Anna Marie's in Hong Kong, and no doubt frequently hops over the border to Shenzhen, which is one of the world's futuristic cities indeed. I did as well when I work in Hong Kong. I love going over to Shenzhen, and those who do get over there know, and anyone who ever arrived at Hong Kong's airport knows, the second you arrive in right before immigration, they scan every single person coming up at the top of the escalator, right, Anne-Marie? So the SenseTime is the facial recognition company
Exactly.
in China that has really pioneered the space, and they've been doing it longer and better than anybody, to Anna-Marie's point. And they, of course, they're using it in addition to immigration purposes. Of course, they're using it in retail and other very dystopian use cases, as the Hong Kong protesters well know. Yeah.
Such a transition there for SenseTime, because I recall our medical device company is just it just this month actually is embedded in the AI lab within the Hong Kong Science Park.
Yeah.
And the folks who really have I don't know, I guess you'd call them having the biggest footprint inside the AI lab is SenseTime. The SenseTime actually spun out of the Hong Kong Science Park and the Hong Kong Science Park's AI lab before they became what they are today. So they have a very strong presence there, and they're meant to be a resource for those of us in the startup community around all the things that they've done. But I think a lot of us in that ecosystem had a very different view of SenseTime even 3 years ago than we do today. But they, no doubt, I mean, the tech there and their ability to sort of forecast what's happening next is unprecedented.
Yeah, SenseTime is
Well,
also one of the most impressive booms and companies that most people have never heard of, unless you live in the region. And then, you almost certainly have heard of it because they're based out of Shenzhen, by the way. Yeah. So other really interesting topics, but that was quite an interesting conversation around the Google Store and other really
Well,
interesting.
So, Tyler, this
I
is.
have
Yes,
a
Sorry, go ahead.
I
Francine.
have a friend.
Yeah.
I have a friend who runs innovation at Walmart,
Uh huh.
and they have had all this consumer data for years.
Sure.
And what they're doing is trying to get the AI to make sense of the data so that they can make better predictions
Yep.
so that nobody makes a purchase they don't expect. That
Right.
I find that scary.
Yeah. So, by the way, better AIs means better prediction equal, and you can see this very easily in the context of TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, where these apps are constantly trying to give you better recommendations of the next video or image that you see. Because the better the image, and by the way, so is Clubhouse. Clubhouse is trying to give you a better recommendation of the rooms in your hallway, and
Right.
this art of recommendations is incredibly important, and because the better the recommendation, the more likely you are to stay in the app, and the longer you stay in the app, the more revenue. So there's a very direct correlation between better recommendations and more revenue, and that plays in the digital domain on your screens and also in retail. So it's there's
Well,
a
I mean, better prediction of what people are going to buy and
yeah
when they're going to buy it
yeah
means lower prices, means lower inflation for
and
the
less
US, which
less
is
need to
actually in one level
yes,
good.
but also better floor utilization and better tracking of inventory in real time. And as I understand it, Cal, and you of anyone in the room might know better than most, in this battle between H&M and Zara, apparently Zara and I'm the H&M senior leadership are quite close because it's based out of Stockholm as well. H&M is a Stockholm company, and I may or may not have close affiliations that I can't reveal. But the the their competitor Zara is renowned for their ability to do inventory tracking in near real time, utilization of their it's kind of the better that you can anticipate the demand for any particular items, you always have enough items in stock, but not too many. And that's an incredible art form in fast fashion that apparently Zara is quite masterful at.
Isn't
But we
Shine like
all
the
have
similar?
that now. It's called just in time.
Yeah,
And Walmart pioneered it,
yeah.
but it failed us during the pandemic.
Yeah, there's another interesting twist on it now that delivery systems have become quite robust in most cities, which is if they don't have it in stock and you come up to the counter and say, hey, do you have this in a size M? And they can then respond back to you rather than saying, sorry, we don't. They can say, we don't have it here at this location, but we can have it sent to your house in an hour because there's a factory, on the outside of town. And, they'll get it to you real quick, like, so they don't
And
lose that.
Tyler and
Yes.
Cal, Cal would probably know more about this, but I'm just wondering, like product discovery, especially on the street level, right? On retail stores, it's so amazing. Like you go into a store, you discover like these unique products. I'm wondering whether also this video capture and idea of like trying to figure out how customers react is the next step towards digitizing all the stores, right? Because product
Well,
discovery
so
on Amazon is
yeah,
hard.
no, so if you look at apparel retail over the last year, 2 years, the people that like TK Maxx or TJ Maxx in the US, if they use different names. They just as an example, where you're giving pleasure by discovery, right? You're going in there finding random products. That seems to work for customers, right? But just being a store where you have inventory and you just go in there and you look for the inventory, you have crappy service from the customer, from the employee because they're not paid well, they're treated like crap, and then you just basically they're just stacking shelves, right? And putting things back where they were, etc. Those models are dying. It's over. That game is like literally, if people are not aware of it, it's just dying. And if those retailers don't know it, you just got to short them. I mean, they're just dying. So you have to do something different, Heyman, right? If you are going to provide a physical experience, you have to do something different. It's got to be meaningful for people because they've seen it. And in this last year, they've seen the beauty of just I know returns haven't been that great, but they'll get 5 things and then they'll return 4 and they'll do all those things. And that's clunky, but people are much, much, much more informed about, e-commerce and actually like it. It's good. So now if you're going to go, create a model and so that's just to your point, Heyman, this technology and Tyler's earlier example of where you can play the music that people care about when they go in. The experience feels good and it's seamless and it's and it feels good. It just got to feel good. Then those
Cal.
stores will work. And I think
Hey,
so.
Cal.
Technology will play a big role.
And
Hey,
coming from you,
Cal.
it's huge.
It's him. It's MA. Cal, just to chime in with what you're saying, because I have worked in fashion most of my life. And again, we go back to sort of the shopping experience, right? The customer journey. So a lot of the customer experience of the customer journey, you're seeing it spread over into Europe and to the point of Zara. Zara was a case study I did during my MBA, and I believe I still have the Harvard Business Review case on it, which was very interesting. But the interesting part about this is that it's happening in every retail vertical. So came into the effect, and any of those, that there's many retail verticals. The retail industry is massive. It goes from hard to soft. Soft tends to be luxury, diamonds, jewelry, to hard being electronics, automotive, and such. So it's a very broad spectrum when you paint the brush of retail. So when it comes to apparel, fashion, jewelry, luxury, HBA, health and beauty products, stuff like that, you will see that what you're creating is a customer experience in certain areas. And one specifically that I think Tyler may know of, because Tyler is very connected to Sweden, is the fact that Sweden hired an executive from Whole Foods about 10 years ago to come express how the customer experience was created in Whole Foods, like Whole Paycheck, I call them, because Deleuze, when I worked on Deleuze in Belgium and Carrefour in France, and Albert Heijn in Netherlands, all three of those major grocery outlets were now looking to how to create what Cal is saying, the customer experience, the journey, blah, blah, blah. But the interesting thing is it was only Sweden that hired an ex-person from Whole Foods to bring them into Sweden to help them create that customer experience in the grocery and the food and grocery market. So each vertical has its own customer journey and experience. It's so broad, and that's why it gets to be very interesting to see how technology will affect each one of those retail verticals.
But I'm actually thinking beyond that because I'm thinking like beyond brick and mortar. I'm thinking like the virtual stores. I'm thinking about like the digitization of
We
the store experience.
Heyman, we had
And
that. We went deep on that 2 days
yeah.
ago in a big way. The VR AR future of retail, which and what inspired that was Mark Zuckerberg himself
Mm,
appeared at my friend's VivaTech conference 2
yeah.
days ago, and he was just jumping up and down about VR and more than he has in the past. That it's really here, it's on the horizon, and of course he's doing that because he knows Apple's about to announce their big push, and that is going to be wild to witness how e-commerce is impacted by AR VR. And just for those who haven't heard it, imagine wearing AR glasses like sunglasses and overlaid on your regular reality is a new augmented reality. It's called AR. And when you go into a shoe store, for example, or any store, let's use the shoe store example, you will, of course, will see the shoes on the wall as you always have before, but now there will be a floating the software will recognize that shoe as a Michael Jordan Nike high top through image recognition. Every shoe will be recognized. Every garment will be recognized. Every car, everything you walk around will be known to the system, and it will tell you the price of that thing that you can buy right now and have it shipped to your house right now. And it will often be cheaper than the price of the sticker in the store. So in the shoe shop scenario, the shoe is $100. You could click it right here, right now. Just click your finger twice because that technology is also part of AR. Is this, the Apple Watch was going to be able to detect when you click your finger and your thumb, and that's how you click. And you can click and buy this shoe right now for less than they're selling it in this physical retail shop, and we'll have it delivered to your house in an hour. And so that's, I think, the easy way to think of it. John, I know you want to jump in, but
Also,
I needed to turn it over to Carl real quick. Go ahead, John. Then we'll go to Carl.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Just real quickly. So the customer experience is really a means to an ends, the ends being more sales. And Francine pointed out how just in time failed us during the pandemic. So my question to Francine or anybody is, maybe Cal knows the answer. Has anyone really optimized the convergence of a just-in-time inventory management with personalized sales, so that as people are experiencing the store, you redirect them away from a product where supply chain issues exist to a substitution of some experiential comparability that they can purchase while there's a supply chain issue with the other. Has anybody done that kind of convergence between personalized shopping and the just-in-time kind
I
of
don't know,
supply
but
chain?
when there was a toilet paper shortage, I bought a bidet.
There you go.
Yep.
As you should. Hello from Thailand, by the way.
Did somebody, Dr. Francine, I'm curious, did somebody point you to that, to John's point? Was there like a, hey, you went to your Walmart and they said, oh, why don't you buy this instead?
No,
Was it? No.
yeah, I went to my Walmart and they said buy this Toto washlet instead. No, no, that's not what happened. It would be
God, I
Right.
miss
great
So,
the
if it
bidets
did.
here.
Yeah.
I miss
Uh,
Asian bidets.
it's a little bit of I wouldn't say embarrassing, but I used to do retail arbitrage a lot, and there's a lot of tools like things called BrickSeek. But to your point, Cal, it's that inventory and not really knowing no thought going into where you're putting products. For one example is I'm in Southern California. There's 120 or so Home Depots from here to San Diego, and they all sell Dysons. And they sell them and they go into this clearance cycle, and all of a sudden, a $500 Dyson is going for $70 at a Home Depot in Compton. And it's just that, and it's they don't really
That's bad
look where
inventory
yeah,
management.
yeah, they don't
Yeah.
really look where they're going, and they just spray and pray essentially. And to the other point of being redirected, for me, all I had to learn from retail, and this will really date me, is in Miracle on 34th Street, when someone goes to Macy's or whatever it is and asks for something, Santa Claus is like, hey, this other store has it. And for me, when I get that experience, believe it or not, I'm a loyal customer to the
Yeah.
store that referred me to where to go, because at that moment in time, if I'm looking for children's Tylenol or toilet paper, and that associate says, hey, I heard that the Target down the street has toilet paper, I'm going to remember that associate at that moment in time, because immediacy of your needs is so important, right? So when someone immediately sues your need, whether or not you buy it from that store or not, if you need the item and someone helps you fulfill that need, there's that loyalty. So I'll shut up now.
And
So
one thing we've
Amazon does a fantastic job of this. If you're ever in Seattle and you go to the brick and mortar Amazon bookstore, you can scan the book or use an app just to see the latest, like how much the book is at that time. If they run out of inventory in the store, they will provide suggestions like, if you like this book, you will love these three other alternatives that we have in stock. So that was a great experience, and frankly, it was a pleasure shopping at the brick and mortar store versus ordering it from Amazon.com.
But this also changes the whole brand dynamics too, right? So let's say you have toilet paper and one brand of toilet paper is the most popular one, but they run out. So then what do you do next, right? If you go to like a retailer that has no name brands, like Kirkland brands or anything, what I found from the supermarket realm is when they buy produce, you don't know where the produce is coming from, whether it's coming from farm X or farm Y, because they're all still sold in the supermarket as, spinach, right? So I'm thinking like maybe we're going to be trending towards the more lucrative things for companies such as Amazon's Basics, right? Amazon Basics brand, Kirkland brand, because they could get it from any one of these companies and rebrand it, and technically like, both companies win. So I'm just wondering also the branding for just in time and sort of supply chain, that may be the trend we're going towards, maybe an unbranded brand.
Doesn't that happen already with Trader Joe's? Like
Yeah.
a
Yep.
lot of
Yeah.
their
but this
stuff
this is
that
a
they
massive,
rebrand.
massive industry already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Japan does a
if you
lot of
talk to
that in
anyone in,
retail. Yeah.
it's like massive.
Yeah.
It's like it's 10 years people have been doing this
Yeah. And Canada is
private
like one
label.
of the leaders, right? The Cots
Branding
and
is going to be based on service.
Yeah, that's Muji
yeah.
essentially. When you go into the Muji stores in Japan, and they have everything you can think of for the most part, but it's all just Muji, and they put their brand on it. But it's everything from toothbrushes and toilet cleaner brushes to pillows, and um, anything.
Muji means they don't even put a
It
brand there. It's
Right.
just Muji.
It
No
Muji,
it,
yeah,
brand.
Muji
I
means no
love
brand. Yeah,
Muji.
brandless.
and
Yeah,
to wrap this
expensive
into
dollar store.
everything else we've been discussing with data privacy and antitrust, there's actually a lawsuit brought by the state governments against Amazon for Amazon taking data from branded content, branded products, and the purchasing patterns, and using that to optimize their Amazon no brand materials, and then put those materials ahead of the branding content on their platform. And it's a huge antitrust
Shitty
law
move.
because of this.
It
So
is truly a
who
shitty
brought the
move.
lawsuit, Justin? I'm curious. The brands, right?
Let me get you the
No,
exact
no. I
states.
mean, no, just generally, conceptually, it's the brands that brought that, did they? Because here's the thing. Yeah,
I
here's the thing. This is all store. I don't mean to do a one, but they have good, better, best, right? They have three things, like as a simple level. You've got the good, meaning the affordable, better, and then best. And generally speaking, every one of these merchants in all these stores, they haven't changed this for years. They even put this in the algorithms, right? So they've got these three things. What they do with the good, which is the kind of more affordable, and they try and have their own label, right? And they copy as much as they can from the other brand, right? That's been going on for years. There's a shop here in the UK called Aldi. Yeah, there was a news headline actually about a month ago where they got sued by Marks and Spencers for a caterpillar cake or something, some caterpillar cake, and because they just copied the cake and had it at half the price. So this what people this has been going on for years. But I do think that the control will now move more into. I think Dr. Francine made the absolute insightful thing, because what you do is the products are more or less the same, right? At each one of the categories, good, better, best. The good products are the same. Like you can buy Kellogg, product, or you can buy, Costco's own Kirkland brand, cornflakes. It's gonna be the same. So now, what differentiates is how you feel when you buy it, whether it's online, VR, e-commerce, VR, or in the store, how you feel, and that experience differentiates everything. So the brand is how you feel and your experience as you buy that product, and you differentiate that,
And we talked a couple months ago about the genetics of getting a good deal and how some people have a gene that causes them to be really satisfied with a good deal, whereas other people have different experiences about what makes them feel good.
Philip.
And
One.
on the differentiation piece, you have Gucci going into AR VR. I wanted to chime in on this aspect. They have those sneakers that they released
Yep.
early this year. So you're not actually buying sneakers, you're buying the experience of sneakers. And then also recently they went into Roblox, which is targeting a young demographic. So they're branding for the future with that move.
Yeah.
I'm done
My
speaking.
brother got like two of the Roblox drops and he was trying to get more.
Virtual
Like he's
Gucci.
11 and he was like
I invited
NFTs.
Philip in here because Philip, you clearly have a background relevant to the conversation. Any insights you wanted to add on this point?
Yeah, thanks so much, Tyler. I really appreciate it. Honestly, first off, it's very exciting to hear all of us on this feed talk about neuro, talk about eye tracking.
The magic
We
of
should also be
Clubhouse.
talking about biometrics,
Yeah.
exactly. But it's just a vote of confidence towards my industry in
Yeah.
general. I'm the senior vice president of business development for a company called Media Science. Media Science is an American company. It's an independent company that's been in this space for the past 20 years. And this is a great American story that hasn't been told, but we've been pioneers within, eye tracking, facial expression recognition, biometrics, and understanding how content impacts people. We actually started out as the Disney Advertising and Media Laboratory. So I don't want to take over the whole room, but if there are any American or global companies or individuals in this room that would like to have a deep dive individually with me,
Well,
please feel free to reach out
well
to me on
let's
LinkedIn, man.
let's see how insightful you can be. What's your best insight you can add to the conversation at hand here?
That's like asking, tell me about the ocean,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
There's so many different things with this, guys.
Yeah.
Everything that you guys talked about in terms of retail will be transformational. We're going to see not only AR, augmented retail experiences, but we're going to see physical screens in retail now, even more so. Imagine walking into a 7-Eleven and a full screen advertisement across all of the back walls and all of the coolers takes over the entire place that's completely personalized to you. The same thing with content, right? I think we have a huge gap right now towards the content that we have on platforms like Netflix. We're going to see even more personalization, right? And in the future, we're going to see full-scale global biometric networks that are going to enable us to communicate better with each other, to understand what gains our cognitive attention, what impacts us, the level of response that we have to different stimuli. So like I said, this is a drop in the ocean.
Yeah. So who on
So
the
Philip, can I
Philip,
ask
just
can I ask a question, Philip? So, and just to kind of get a little tangible. So today I buy carrots, right? And I either get it delivered by my Sainsbury's grocery store at home. I don't know what carrots I'm going to get, but I click some little thing on my PC, and it gets on the basket, and then it arrives, and a very smiley man or woman gives me the carrots, right? Or I go to the store and I have, to Heyman's point, I have three lots of carrots, good, better, best, some wonky ones, some middle ones, and some other ones, and then I buy them from the store, right? How will that change 5 years from now, 10 years from now, based on what you understand and see visionary wise in terms of eye tracking, et cetera, et cetera? How would that experience change, do you think?
Well, first off, you're going to be reminded to buy carrots, right? In terms of like going into the store, right? Like, eye trackers can be used to identify if you were looking at carrots this week versus looking at carrots last week. In terms of delivery, like that's a whole other conversation. And I would bring in like Uber Eats into that conversation. In the future, you're going to be able to have those carrots directly from the farm and integrate it into the meal that you ordered on Uber Eats, right? So
hmm,
there's a few different ways that this applies to carrots.
could it?
so Philip,
Hey,
one other thing.
hold on, Heyman.
Oh,
That's a
yeah.
really wild thought, and I'll hand it to you real quick, Heyman. But I'm wondering because all of the health we're simultaneously making innovations, not just uniquely in one category. We're making innovations across the board, and health is one of those areas that is quickly becoming digitized with sensors and everything. And could it be possible that my Apple Watch knows that I'm low, the thing that could optimize my health the most at this moment is eating carrots, and might even suggest that based on um, something that it senses, and it could say you need to order carrots with when I say, hey, when I'm looking at my next meal to order, I get a pop up that says, you
You're
probably
carrot
shouldn't order,
deficient.
don't order that cheesecake, you probably should order this juice from this place or something. I know that's a wild idea, but I'm wondering, do you think with that we could ever get there where I tell the app, actually, you know what, can you help me actually control, because people do pay nutritionists, people pay personal trainers, people pay because they know they want to do better, but they don't have the willpower within themselves. Could the tech eventually become our virtual nutritionist? Because that's very valuable. Nutritionists charge an incredible amount of money, honestly. So I'm wondering if there's a technological possibility of that.
I'm not sure. I mean, I believe probably, right? Like it
Tyler,
makes
I
a lot
think
of sense. I
absolutely.
think someone else would
It
have a better
would have
comment on
to
it.
get into your microbiome. It would have to be able to read your microbiome.
Yeah, yeah,
Poop.
But you guys are aware that Facebook is coming out with their own watch as well, right?
yep.
Yeah.
You're
By
about.
the way, Philip, like you're
Hello?
on this platform, right?
Yeah, but
On
let's ask.
just
Let's see how clever Philip is. Philip, do you know why they're coming out with their watch?
Of course I do,
Go ahead.
right? Because they realized how powerful biometric data is.
And yeah, and to keep going, that's
I have a
scratching the surface.
non-disclosure agreement with Facebook. If you want to find out directly,
Yeah.
let's have a
Well,
one-on-one,
we have
right?
Facebook
But
team
like I
members on
know
the
I know
stage, Philip.
obviously.
We know far more
Yeah,
than
and
we
I have
can
a
say.
non-disclosure, so even more so,
Yeah.
right? Why I shouldn't be talking
No,
about
you can give the real
biometrics with
answer.
Facebook.
It's not. It wouldn't
Hey,
conflict with your NDA as to why they're actually doing the smartwatch.
Well, I plan on coming out with my own biometric sensors globally as well with media science, right? And the reason is because with heart rate as an example, right? This is a measure of cognitive attention. So now I can
Yep.
understand on a second by second basis
Yes.
right? What draws cognitive attention and
Yes.
sustains it over time?
Yep.
And with response intensity, which is a measure of basically sweat secretion,
Yep.
it's called galvanic skin response.
Yep.
This is a measure of response intensity. So how much did I respond to the stimuli in front of
Correct.
me,
Which
right?
connects
So
with their
these two
VR.
pieces are critical.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
that's
but
for AR glasses.
yes, but there's also a key reason as to why they're even interested in sensors in the first place. Of course, it gives them a benefit, but in part, it's because Apple's removing their other streams of data that their business is fundamentally built on, which is why they're so focused on it, by the way. But let's go ahead and we've done one headline and we've gone an hour and 48 minutes on one headline.
Tyler,
We have
That was
about,
do you mind if
yes.
yeah,
Can we kindly move to some other
we
subjects,
have
please?
about
do,
Thank you.
Did we
40,
cover Amazon MGM
we have 47
so
other
far?
headlines. We've done an hour and 47 minutes on the first one.
can I
So
add
one
just
minute
one
on
more
each.
thing, Tyler?
Huh?
Can I add just one more thing?
Sure, go
Because
ahead.
we've discussed this at length in several sessions, but I don't think, in terms of biometric data, we've talked about gathering biometric data through wearable devices, but I don't think we've really dug into the Tesla suit, and it's a full body haptic, suit, and it'd be interesting because I came back from New York and I met up with a couple of fashion designer friends who were talking about in the future leveraging the Tesla suit so that they would be able to remotely feel fabric from India while they're in New York,
Interesting.
and be able to in future for shopping for clothes, purchasing a dress online, be able to actually put on a VR headset, be able to see it in virtual reality in 3D or what have you, and also be able to feel the fabric at any other part of the dress through haptics, through the haptic
We had
suit.
a very big debate
Because the
about that about 4 days ago with Ame and someone else will remind me who was arguing the other side of that. I think Chris from
We've done
Stockholm.
this. We've done this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nicholas,
oh cool,
Nicholas from Stockholm from the VR company and Ame got into it quite deeply on that point.
yeah, because the fidelity of the suit is incredible. You can feel a spider crawl across your hand with that suit. So I can see that in future
Yeah,
being really useful.
he tweeted a lot of links to kind of support his perspectives. Which, by the way, for those who aren't familiar with tech news around the world, you're in the clubhouse room, which is the where we're all sitting together around the virtual campfire. On the Twitter account, we're sharing links in real time around the conversation we're having. And since this conversation about the Google store, there's been no less than 50 links up related to everything we've talked about are being shared by the people in the audience and on stage in real time, which you can follow and click and start, reshare the ones that you like. And that's at TNATW. So there's a whole second screen experience going on, which Rajiv on stage is one of the notable contributors to that, as is Amanda and David and Cheryl and certainly Faraz and Monica and a whole lot of people in the audience. Spend a lot of people almost focus more on that part of it, but clearly they're listening because they find fantastic articles, the best articles on the web on every topic we discuss, which is a true thank you to everyone who does that. But yeah, follow the Twitter account TNATW to see all of the links that are related to everything we discuss in real time, and feel free to share your own and we'll retweet them if they're relevant. Other headlines, or does someone Mahogany, go ahead.
Since this one was such a topic of interest, can we have another room on it at a later
Yes,
point?
we could do a deep dive, what we call deep dive rooms, exactly. And we we do deep dive rooms on multiple topics each week. This is certainly one of them, and I'll earmark to invite back Philip. I'll follow you now so that I recall to include you in that one for sure as a co-moderator, perhaps. So you can click on the title of this room to see the other upcoming rooms, which are usually around deep dives on AI and VR. We did the VR one yesterday, actually, with Victoria and Michael. We did a fintech one earlier today. We have a health tech one coming up, a blockchain one coming up, a Canada tech one coming up, another med tech one coming up, another AI one coming up, a digital inclusion one coming up. You can see, and then clean tech one that's coming up on the 30th is going to be a barn burner. Because it's going to involve my friend from Stockholm, Ingmar Renshaug, who does this huge platform called We Don't Have Time, which Greta is not able to attach her name to because she now doesn't attach her name to anything. But Ingmar and Greta are kind of very close in Stockholm, and so yeah, maybe we might even get Greta Thunberg to pop in for that one. Actually, we'll see. You didn't hear that from me though. Don't let's not break Clubhouse. So other second headline. Headline number 2. This one will go very quickly. Twitter is working on new controls over who can @mention you in their tweets. Twitter is the home of cancel culture, according to this blog post. And whether you understand the evolution of that trend or not, you no doubt have had some experience on the platform where you've been mentioned by people that you would rather not have been mentioned by, whether that be spammers, former friends, colleagues, etc. And now, in line with its relatively recent addition to the capacity to control who can reply to your tweets, which you've no doubt seen, you can now limit who is able to reply to your tweets. Twitter is also experimenting with new controls over who can @mention you on Twitter. And if they do, you can remove it. Very clever. And no doubt this was discovered by our friend Jane in Hong Kong, as she is the person and the source of all of these types of revelations. And I could ping her, but it's a Saturday night in Hong Kong, and I assume she's having fun. But do follow Jane on Twitter. It's a shame that article didn't credit her for being the source of that leak. She's always the one that finds those. Other interesting news, kind of going back to the Google store that kicked this whole conversation off, and kind of maybe we should have brought this one up when we were talking about the Google store. Google's app, Google's phone, the Android phones this week, it's discovered there was a bug in the Android Google app putting your privacy at risk. And then that has further implications with their Google store in Chelsea. And that gives me an opportunity to circle back to Carl. You had a point you wanted to mention about the Google store previously, Carl?
Yeah, can do very quickly. One thing that wasn't, a couple of things that weren't mentioned is one, there's the rumors of the Whitechapel chip that they're potentially working on with Samsung, they've traditionally used the Snapdragon Qualcomm chips for their Pixel phones.
Uh-huh.
And they're now looking at, there's rumors of them developing their own, which they would only be doing that if they really, really want to make a push for, and like a fresh push on Pixel. So the store will be useful for that. But then the other side of it is like the data thing, self-service sort of AI kiosks I can see being a thing. But the one thing that nobody really mentioned is they really put a focus on accessibility and sort of disability accessories. Like we had the text, the voice to speech, but also the blind guide for running and whatnot.
Right.
And if they're really going to go into this, if they're going to do things like tracking bracelets, for instance, they'll do that whole silver economy thing, and maybe hardware to sort of monitor the elderly when they're in accommodate assisted living aspects. They're going to need places to fit these and actually for people to try them on. So I think you're going to see a hell of a lot in these stores going forward. But I think accessibility and those kind of things is going to be is going to be on the cards at sometime soon, really.
Yep. A real minor story that in honor of Amé on stage from Amsterdam, that the Netherlands is claiming, and investors say that Eindhoven is poised to become the Netherlands' #2 tech hub, which is a very minor story. I think the bigger story is that Amsterdam is kind of rising up amongst the EU ranks and global ranks as a strong tech hub in the past year, and they all, in part due to Prince Constantine's support. But they've got a lot of smart folks there, and Keith Colin from Booking.com, which is kind of their crown jewel of a tech company there. And Case is a very clever guy who I worked directly with at EQT Ventures for a minute. And what else do we... And by the way, he was Case from Booking.com, which is spelled Kees. And he's a very interesting individual, by the way. Case, having grown Booking to be one of the most important biggest global successful websites on the internet, and by the way, the biggest advertiser on Google, and that's why you see so many ads for related to travel. That when Uber wanted to grow globally into multiple markets around the planet as quickly as possible, they recruited Case. Travis wanted Case as the advisor to help globalize Uber, and he certainly did that. Case is an interesting figure. If you're interested in growing your startup globally very quickly, he's one of the few people who have really done that. CEOs of, speaking of chips, as Carl was just doing with Google and Qualcomm, ARM and NVIDIA, two of the other world's big chip manufacturers, discussing a controversial merger. Independence doesn't equate to strength. ARM CEO Simon Segars said NVIDIA's support would allow them to meet increased market demand. That's kind of BFD, a BFN, our sister news network, Big Fucking News. You may have heard of them. That's definitely up their alley. That's some BFN for you. The merger of ARM and NVIDIA, that would be massive.
And it would reshape the whole semiconductor industry. And
Totally.
ARM is now like a geopolitical hot potato.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting.
And then NVIDIA plays the primary role for chips around AI and mining and video. And interesting that NVIDIA's been booming lately. And let's give a shout out to NVIDIA has a team member who joins us here very regularly. My mind is blanking on her name. I believe she has a Korean name.
Magdi, I think.
Yeah.
Magdi, yeah.
Yeah. Stripe employees have been offered to move outside of the Bay Area, away from their primary HQ, in part because Stripe itself is thinking of moving out of San Francisco. And so they are offering the employees who do want to move out of the Bay Area, they can do so if they take a 10% pay cut, which, by the way, they would be very smart to do because they're paying about 100% more for living in the Bay Area than they could even by living in other parts of the U.S., and about 400% more than they could by living in their own tropical paradise in Thailand, if you were so crazy enough to try something like that. But interesting, it says that their employees are taking the 10% pay cut and getting the hell out of Dodge, as, by the way, San Francisco is now the number 2 city of people leaving, Baltimore being number 1, closely followed by San Francisco and number 2. And where are they going? So the people leaving is Baltimore and San Francisco. The places where people are going in the U.S., number 1 is Seattle, and then Mesa, Arizona, strangely, and then the Dallas area and Austin make up the first 4. So interesting to see so many people moving from California to Texas at the moment.
It's a good
I
news
read
if you're a Democrat.
Yep.
I read that Austin is 53 degree today. My goodness.
53 Celsius.
Yes,
Yeah, that's
very so hot.
that
That's
is
like onsen. No, 10 degrees higher than onsen water. So hot.
Well, first, no one has an idea what an onsen is unless you've lived in Japan, as Cheryl and I have. It's a sauna, essentially. And then, yes, 53 in Celsius is about, 120 Fahrenheit. So that is quite hot. And Austin does get very hot. And it is kind of funny that when all of the Californians were moving to Austin and their kind of tech exodus back in the February, March, and April, a lot of people like myself who love Austin but don't live in Austin were very quick to point out, yeah, you might not, you might need to reconsider when July rolls around, as they no doubt will be doing. And they're now starting to wonder what exactly they got themselves into. It's a whole other world there when it gets above 130 degrees. We're picking up steam on the headlines, and forgive me for not remembering who sent this research article in. That brain of this, although I'm assuming it might be John, brain imaging before and after COVID-19 in UK Biobank.
Good timing for me to come back in the room.
Oh,
this is Danish.
Yeah, tell us about this one.
So this is the one that I sent over. This is a very interesting study, and I'm letting you know right now that it's going to be all over the news because I've already been asked to comment on this because I'm an ENT, ear, nose, throat doctor. And so what they found was there was a UK biobank, and I'm going to set the stage, and maybe this is too detailed, so Tyler, feel free to let me know.
Okay.
But 782 participants, 394 participants had SARS-CoV-2. And then they looked at the brain images, and they actually had baseline images already as part of the biobank study, which just tells you how much better sometimes UK studies are than the US studies. And that's as much as I'm going to say about it. But they looked at functional and structural imaging of the brain, and they saw something very interesting, which was that there were changes, and not just small changes, significant gray matter changes. And so when you think about the olfactory pathway, and what we found in the beginning was that people were losing sense of smell, and then they said, "Hey, is COVID the the initial thing that they said was, oh, this means COVID is getting through the olfactory bulb into the brain." It was perhaps presumptuous. So there's already been tons of studies looking at this specific point about whether the anosmia, aka sense of smell, being lost is because of changes to the brain or changes to the support to the nerves themselves or to the supporting cells. And what we know is that when they looked at SARS-CoV-2 and its expression in cells, they didn't see any expression in neurons. And what they saw was expression in the cells that were around the neuron. So all the supporting cells, the nutrients, and all of that. And we've actually seen that this is the case with also chronic sinusitis. And so this huge supposition that all of these news media, by the way, are going to talk about in the next week, like, oh, like, yeah, and by the way, they also made another leap, which was anosmia is the first sign of Alzheimer's. And so now some of the news media is going to say, oh, not getting vaccinated for your child, which is a big one, or for a proxy as a proxy automatically means that you're exposing them to something that may be connected to Alzheimer's, and it's actually not the case. That's a lot of leaps, and I think it still needs to be borne out. And you guys know my opinion on vaccines. I'm definitely a pro-vaccine person, but we've got to be careful to let the science be the science. And so, TLDR, we know that when you lose your sense of smell, there are very quick changes in the brain. And they've done tons of studies when you lose your sense of smell because you have a very long-standing sinus inflammation. We see the same sort of structural changes in the brain. And so this could just be because you lose your sense of smell when you get COVID that lasts often years, or a year at least now at our knowledge today. And with about a year of no sense of smell, your brain starts changing, kind of like how people have found that there are structural changes and functional changes in the brain when you lose your sense of sight or your sense of taste or your sense of touch. Our bodies start the neuroplasticity of the brain again is remarkable, and we start seeing these changes 3 to 6 months out. So it's a very interesting study. I find the technology used in this study much more interesting than the actual quote unquote findings that they had. I think they made a lot of leaps, and I don't think that people that get Alzheimer's at this point, we do not have enough evidence that is connected, or people that get COVID that they are at increased risk of Alzheimer's. We do not have enough evidence for that right now.
Doctor, maybe talk about the long COVID phenomenon and how there are potentially millions of people with this phenomenon of long term side effects from COVID that is just being impact. We understand the full impact now, which is very scary.
Actually, Evan, what I'll say is with long COVID, we don't understand even the full impact. I think we're underestimating the long term impact. What we know with long COVID is, and John, please correct me because I know you keep up with the stuff better, and we have an expert on the stage, so I do want to be careful about that. But I was going to say that with long COVID, what we have found is that at this point, it seems to be a lot of the things are associated with vascular pathology. That is the early belief, and there's not enough evidence to say that definitively. But when we're looking at how do you lose your sense of smell, or why do you have an inflammatory reaction in your lungs, or why are you having long COVID brain fog, we are finding there to be the same sort of, these microvascular structures getting clotted out or heavily inflamed seems to be the core pathology. But again, Evan, what I'm saying is we've only had this around for a little bit. We're still learning so much. And I can tell you that my hypothesis, which means that I don't have any evidence to prove it because the time will tell. We don't know what I think we're severely underestimating the long term, not only neurotropic, but full body impacts of long COVID. And I think I think it's sad that the medical community did not appreciate it in the beginning. I think this means we need to listen to our patients just a little bit more. And then now I think we need to take this very, very seriously. This is probably one of the scariest things that are the entire generation. I mean, 1/3 of people that get COVID have long-term sequelae of long-haul COVID. So, that's a really scary thing. John, I don't know if you have thoughts.
Yeah. I'll just add a couple of highlights. And I'm gonna digress a little bit, but it's gonna feed back into the questions you've been raising. Biogen recently had approval of an antibody targeted at one of the stigmata of Alzheimer's disease, which with multiple other drug trials, including this one, the entire advisory panel for the approval of this drug either abstained or said no, and yet the FDA approved it. So there's a huge controversy around that. And the reason that the best candidate for the Alzheimer's disease, because it correlates somewhat with the disease itself, are these amyloid plaques that they're targeting, and yet none of the drugs targeted at the amyloid plaque have shown any benefit. So it turns out that most likely the cause of Alzheimer's is much more related to chronic inflammation, and that the plaques and the other stigmata of Alzheimer's on pathology are epiphenomenon rather than causative. So coming back now to COVID and long haulers, and this British study showing that scans before and after COVID infection show a decline of absolute brain matter, is disconcerting, because while the vascular insults are likely playing some significant role early in the course of the acute infection and the cytokine storm and the hypercoagulable state that is associated with COVID, the fact that they're detecting these changes that far out suggests that there may be an inflammatory component as well. We don't routinely do brain biopsies on people who have brain fog from long COVID for obvious reasons, but it remains, as you said, very much of a mystery. What we do and don't know about the COVID long haul syndrome and the brain fog is perhaps one of, if not the biggest challenges of understanding it, because, as several people have said, the number of people affected with the long haul syndrome globally is huge. The long tail of this, let's assume the pandemic is over a year from now. We're going to be left, to draw a crude analogy, with the Gulf Wars, all of the people who were harmed by IEDs that have this long tail drain on the health of these individuals and on the healthcare system. I think we're going to be looking at the same kind of thing with the long haul syndrome from COVID. So there's a real urgency of understanding what's going on, and some of the reasons to be optimistic is, number one, is, as Dr. Danish said, the brain is incredibly plastic. It retains a lot of plasticity throughout life. It declines over time, but the ability of the brain to rewire after a stroke is just profound. And so I think people suffering from long haul shouldn't despair over these findings, because I believe that there are ways to overcome it. But there's also some very, very good research ongoing right now attacking Alzheimer's with anti-inflammatory drugs that cross the blood-brain barrier. And there's some very, very hopeful signs that that may be what we've been looking for decades in terms of therapies for Alzheimer's. And it's conceivable that that line of research will yield profound benefits in terms, if inflammation is part of what we don't yet know in the long haul brain fog syndrome, it's possible that this research ongoing very aggressively around Alzheimer's may pay dividends in managing the long haul syndrome.
Am I right in saying that American health insurance companies are already preparing to sort of start combating and refuting some of these long-term
Oh,
health
but
effects of
Carl,
COVID?
you cynical bastard. Yes, welcome to America. You've you passed the test.
There's cultural resistance to recognizing the long haul syndrome that is profound. It's deep. It's horrifying. I've been witnessing it for over a year because I've been managing people, some of whom are in the audience, with severe long hauler syndrome, where they have been told, "Oh, you're menopausal. Oh, it's just normal aging. Oh, you're being emotional. Oh, you're depressed and stressed," when in fact they had significant lesions on their MRI scans when they finally got around to scanning them after months and months and months of protest of saying, no, 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 this is not me. I've never been this way my whole life. So there has been a cultural industrial resistance to recognizing this phenomenon that's been horrifying for the many, many, many patients who are suffering severely to this day.
John, can I ask you a quick question? So you just mentioned MRI. Is that the only way going into for an MRI sort of scan with somebody looking for something specific to these conditions, to these symptoms? Is that the only way to know if you're You see what I'm trying to say here? Is that the
Yeah,
only
yeah,
way to
yes.
diagnose and
Yeah,
figure out?
no, I know what you're trying to say, and the, to date, to my knowledge, nobody has developed another good proxy for that assessment. And in fact, the MRI assessment itself is not very sensitive because a lot of people with significant brain fog have completely normal MRIs, and I think that's an issue of resolution and window and how they do the windows on the MRI. I don't know of another good test. I do know that some people have had their fluid extracted from a lumbar puncture, their cerebrospinal fluid, and there is not a characteristic pattern you can see from that. That's more invasive than an MRI anyway, but to date, we don't have good markers. We will. I mean, you know, the bioscience industry is beginning to wake up to this phenomenon. But and so we may have some proxy markers soon that are better than having to do an MRI, because the MRI itself is neither sensitive nor specific. But there is a pattern of lesions that is consistent with the people with severe brain fog and severe cerebral impact from the virus associated with long haul.
This is Chris. Does any of this reveal look like it's ischemic, like basically low oxygen saturation in the blood resulting in ischemic death or damage in certain areas, or is this
That tends
look
to
like
have
something
its own
else?
specific pattern on MRI, and that is not the pattern that's been reported. However, the significant hypoxia that's associated with a lot of the acute infection is somewhat mysteriously, not entirely, but somewhat mysteriously associated with less shortness of breath than you would get if there were other causes of that low oxygen. So the fact that people can function with a low oxygen without feeling as short of breath as they would from other causes remains a mystery. But to your point, did that play a role in the persistent brain fog? Most likely it played a role, even though it's not leaving its signature on the MRI scans.
And
Yeah.
to kind of take it one more step, Chris, I just want to be very clear that this study specifically ruled out people with moderate to severe disease. So this study was looking at mild disease. So we're saying that there's clear proof now that this is, again, a huge deal. This is what I think people should be focusing on instead of asking me if this causes Alzheimer's, which I think needs to be studied. But now we have, doctors love evidence. And this is clear evidence that there are long-term structural changes from patients that have mild COVID. And so to answer your question about whether this is connected to something called anoxic brain injury or long-term hypoxia, I think John kind of said it right, which is it can present very atypically on imaging, but if this does not look like the typical presentation of chronic hypoxia or hypoxic injury, acute hypoxic injury, which both have very clear pathognomonic looks.
But it's highly likely that even though it's not leaving its signature, that it does play a role, because a lot of people with mild to moderate disease don't even know, unless they monitor, that their oxygen saturations are dipping without them even knowing it. It's probably a contributing factor, but not the primary causative factor there. And one other thing I'll just mention is that in the funding that's passed through Congress with these big bills, they've augmented funding for various areas through the NIH and elsewhere. They have failed today still to increase the funding to the National Institute of Neurologic Diseases to tackle this problem, and that's a mistake.
Okay.
So it's the NIH and Johns Hopkins who are leading the studies at this time, John, or do you know of any other institutions?
Well, the study that was just published came out of the UK. And that Dr. Danish brought up, and so there are people who have published on this as long as 6 or 8 months ago was when the first studies I saw were probably early fall last year, showing the lesions that suggested just a handful of cases suggested a specific kind of injury seen on MRI in severe COVID long haulers, but for whatever reason, this whole pandemic has been so politicized in so many countries, including the US, that to be able to lead with science has been incredibly difficult. And it's very disappointing to me that as of this moment, there has, to my knowledge, not been any boost to the funding for the research into the neurologic long haul disorders that so many people, and the problem is that the demographic of many of the people who were the first to be really severely effective is young women. So this is not the people who are most severe in the hospital. This is not necessarily spread evenly across demographics. It was focused a lot on younger women. So this should be a very high research priority, and it doesn't appear to be as of this moment.
Hey, John,
And
1 second. There's a headline that just came in that says the U.S. pumps $3.2 billion into COVID fighting antiviral effort, which appears to be tablets, pills. Earlier
Yeah.
this, yeah. I'm.
Yes.
Can anyone make comments on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, if we had something that was really effective, which to date we don't. I mean, if you look at how many infectious diseases we can just cure in a couple of days with antibiotics, we don't really have anything closely resembling that kind of dramatic benefit. If we had something like that, we might be able to abort not only the acute syndrome, but long haulers. Well, that's a hypothesis. There's no evidence. We don't know because we don't have such a drug. But if we came up with such a drug, that would be great. But in the meantime, we have these millions of people who are suffering from long haul syndrome and brain fog, who are having trouble doing their jobs and returning to work. That warrant some funding as well. So I mean, kudos for putting the money into an acute treatment, but come on, let's get some money to deal with the people that are already damaged.
Got it.
And just to kind of so Tyler,
Yeah.
what's interesting is that we broke this news a week ago. So
Mm.
this is the same news as Molnupiravir.
Mm.
So this is the same news we were talking about, the oral antiretroviral that is actually not FDA approved or under EUA. They pumped all of this at risk because, again, I think they're signaling that the vaccine hesitancy, I think, again, I think it's misguided, but I think it's great that they're putting more treatment options out there. I think the vaccine hesitancy amongst the larger population is making it harder and harder to keep this under control. So they're saying, look, if we have an oral early treatment drug, it might be worthwhile. So that's what's happening. Actually, so at risk. We're pumping 3.2 billion into this drug that is still not phase 3 in clinical trial, phase 3 clinical trials yet.
Yeah.
And so
And
we
I
bought it ahead of time.
I just want to also, just given the focus on COVID, Tyler and Cal, we have our health news around the world in this club
That's right.
tomorrow, and I was like blown away. I like come in here and you guys are still talking COVID, so I love it. So we'll definitely hit on a lot of these things tomorrow at 6. Same club, just a different
Yeah.
focus. But
People are in different time zones. So to check your time zone, because people are from all over the world, very literally in this room, click on the title of
true.
this room and you'll see the Tech News Club page. And then you'll notice that the next upcoming room is called Health News Around the World, and it'll tell you in your local time when that is, and click the little bell on that to get notified, because Prerak and Dr. Donish, I imagine John and others will be joining that. And then that's what we call a deep dive room, where we can go to the take all of these conversations to their natural ends and revelations, which we are unfortunately are unable to do here because we're now on our 5th or 6th headline, and we're 2 hours and 20 minutes, and we got 30 more headlines to go. So hold it for tomorrow if you can, guys. But no doubt that headline will come back up there. Here's some more. In the meantime, we started off today with the first headline about Google's new store in the Chelsea neighborhood of Manhattan, which did its own hour-long circle. But somebody, I believe it was Todd, sent in a really good article about the 5 tech innovations that will shape the future of shopping. The CEO of Chesscake Labs, a software design and engineering company, wrote this one about how the future will be changing. Number 1, voice search, and the future of online shopping. Voice will change shopping, increasing transparency through the blockchain. The ability to track every item through the blockchain is very interesting. IoT and the smart world, number 4. AI and you and how machine learning is poised to impact shopping, number 5. Is personalized online shopping experiences for all of your customers, kind of hinting to what the other expert, Philip, joined us on stage, alluded to. Really great article, quite lengthy, from Forbes. So just tweeted that out, and thank you. I believe it was Todd who sent that in. There's a whole shit ton of interesting headlines, but this one obviously relates to the future of shopping as well as the fact this UK finance study is reporting that a 35% drop in cash transactions in 2022 as COVID crisis turbocharges change in spending habits. Cashless society draws closer with only 1 in 6 payments now happening in cash. And I can tell you it's about 1 in 50,000 in Sweden, where I've never touched cash in 8 years, and I don't know anyone who ever has, including panhandlers on the street don't even accept cash in Sweden, of which those are very hard to find as well. Even the public toilets and musicians playing on the street don't take cash in Sweden, just to give you an idea of the future to come. And that's its own conversation, which we did have earlier today in the payments room with Monica and James from MasterCard. And thank you to both of them for doing that. That's one of the deep dive rooms that we do regularly each week. You already missed it for today. It'll be back next week, but follow the Tech News Club so you get notified when we do the deep dive on the future of payments and with our friends from MasterCard. And then kind of keeping on that theme for a second, investors are fighting to get into a very, very, very hot startup called Stripe, which is the largest fintech in the world. And it is assumed that they will go public before too long. And when they do, it's going to boom. And I'm telling you, you heard me say every day for the past week, Stripe is likely to be the next tech company that joins the pantheon of Facebook, Amazon, Google, etc., because of the fundamental fact that they enable every website to handle payment transactions, including Clubhouse. So the tip jar feature that you see where you can tip me for all of my genius insights is powered by Stripe. And it's a private company. And when it goes public, my God, that's going to be a boom. So you are not able to invest in Stripe yet because it's not public. And investors all over the world are trying to figure out how they can get some of these pre-IPO shares. There's a bit of an intense battle heating up to get some. One interesting company did, called Shopify. And that's partly what, and it was just revealed about 48 hours ago that Shopify, besides being an incredibly explosive volcano of a comet of a startup itself, as the center of the new social commerce universe where e-commerce and social media is crashing head on, which enables Instagram influencers to monetize their followings by creating little e-commerce shops inside of Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and everywhere else. Truly transformative. And they happen to be, they disclosed they have a $350 million holdings in Stripe, which is also one of the few companies that's even growing bigger and faster than they are. And that has and because Shopify is a publicly traded company, their stock is on a tear. And you'll remember that I publicly announced my $1 million investment into Shopify about 2 weeks ago when we were watching the Google live stream event where I said, or was it the Facebook event, Cal? It was the Facebook event, was it not? There was the F8 live stream event.
No, it was Facebook, and then you didn't get a
right.
No mention.
there.
No, but when we were watching the Facebook event together here with members from Facebook team on stage, and they were revealing their future roadmap and everything, and I had predicted they're going to mention Shopify. It turns out they did, but in an incredibly subtle way, and nonetheless,
your thesis was bigger than Facebook.
Yeah,
though. I mean, your thesis for the last 2 months.
Nonetheless, Shopify stock has been on a tear ever since then. I'm very happy to announce, and when the headline came out that they are a large shareholder of Stripe, I was also equally happy, and couldn't be happier for the Stripe guys, John and Patrick.
No investment advice here, but I've been listening to the Spotify thesis, and it's not I've done quite well on that.
Yeah,
I think
not doing too bad, are you, Cal?
Not
doing too bad on the Tech News Around the World stock tip.
No, it's actually, but there's no advice here.
No advice
nice
at
to
all.
hang out here and Good to hear some good
Just
pieces.
common sense.
And this
And
whole new thesis around
yeah,
how people are going to shop in the future,
yeah.
guys, just listen to the stuff here. It's actually the VR stuff and how the experiences are going to change and how it's going to connect with the supply chain and the connection with the the last
Yeah.
mile and some
Well,
of that stuff
Cal,
that's going
frankly,
on here.
what would you know? What would you know? You only ran Best Buy after all. So, yeah,
Yeah, but
hologram.
no, but it's good stuff here.
Another quick headline about holograms and AR plus AI. And this is where things get really fucking crazy, y'all. You've got AR and VR as its own kind of volcano industry, which is about to tip off, as you heard us talking about. And you heard Mark Zuckerberg at VivaTech in Paris 48 hours ago, jumping up and down like a jackass saying, it's finally here, right? He's all in. Google's in. Apple's about to get in around some September 8th, 9th, or 10th when they do their annual new iPhone launch event. They are also expected to announce their AR VR hardware as part of that. And simultaneously, you have AI separately, also booming, absolutely changing the world in its own ways. And then when you combine those two things, my friend, that's called a concrescence, as dentists call it, when your teeth, the nerves of your teeth start to merge together. But the concrescence of technologies is when shit gets crazy because you multiply the effects of these things in ways that you cannot anticipate. And so this article about holograms with AR plus AI, digital creation will become a mainstream service as 5G promotes the upgrade of film and television culture, is a wild article. And thank you to whoever sent that in. And you can find all of these articles on our Twitter account at TNATW. Magically, the first letters of tech news around the world. If you can figure out how that happened, please DM me. The other article I wanted to share was about, and I believe Evan sent this one in, another wild headline that relates to one we shared yesterday about quantum, a new quantum breakthrough. New invention keeps qubits of light stable at room temperature. I'll explain. Researchers from University of Copenhagen have developed a new technique that keeps quantum bits of light stable at room temperature instead of only working at negative 270 Celsius. And normally, you'll remember the article yesterday, if you join us regularly, that scientists, somewhere in the UK, if I remember correctly, had managed to uh, quantumly stabilize a very heavy object, 27 kilograms, a rather unprecedented large object to quantum stabilize. And what's so tricky is that even though the apple on your desk appears to be stable, in fact, it's not. It's a jiggling bunch of, electrons and atoms and whatnot. And to truly make it stable, you have to basically freeze it down to negative 270 Celsius. And they managed to do this with this very large object, which is kind of groundbreaking in itself. And now this article explains, well, now they're making additional progress in a separate sense where they are now back to very small objects, but they're stabilizing them at room temperature. And that's where stuff's going to get really, really interesting in ways that I don't
This is
understand. Yeah.
Yeah,
this
get
is
ready for
so
your
crazy for data.
desktop quantum computer,
Right.
Tyler. Will it run Windows?
Yeah.
That's
Right.
And massive amounts of data in a hard drive, because that's kind of the issue. Is quantum's great because you could process lots of data really fast, but how do you store all of that data? You need a quantum hard drive, and I think this is really your first step to doing that.
Yeah. So for the folks who don't yet have the onboarding fundamentals of quantum computers, just the simplest entry thing to understand fundamentally is that there are what are called quantum computers now. Google and IBM and some universities in China kind of leading this front amongst maybe a few other players. And essentially what they've been able to do is tens of thousands of years worth of computations in minutes, which enables wild new possibilities that are hard to imagine, essentially. And maybe Jean-Francois, you can give an example of what might be enabled by such power, quantum computing power.
Breaking crypto.
Yes, so a great example. And this is one of the debated points that arises whenever we talk about quantum computers, is because cryptography is essentially the art of an incredibly long password, for to oversimplify the point. And one that is so long it could never be broken is the idea. Because the longer it is with each new character at the end, the harder it is to break. A 3-digit password would take you 5 minutes. A 4-digit one would take you several hours. A 5-digit one would take you several days. A 6-digit one would take years, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, what if you have a 1,000-character password? Well, it would take even a computer quite a long time, but not a quantum computer, because it can do 10,000 hours or years or in a minute. So cryptography is based on this principle. It's an incredibly difficult code to break, but yet quantum computers are equally able to do years worth of computations very quickly. So as just an example, but in a more interesting use case, some data set problems that even computers today have a hard time doing is, for example, if you imagine the globe, the planet, and everybody waking up in the morning and going about their commute to work. And imagine the traffic signals on the streets to enable everyone to get to work. Can a computer like your laptop possibly calculate the best way to arrange the green and red lights of every street signal on the planet to most optimally get everyone to work in the most efficient time possible? No, your laptop can't do that because it's not a quantum computer, but it soon might be. And then you can imagine you might be able to have more than 4 Chrome browser tabs open once you have these quantum computers. It's going to be amazing. You'll be able to have as many tabs open on your Chrome browser as you want. That's a joke, everybody. Anyway, so we'll see. But it's interesting, that the reason that this headline is interesting to geeks on stage is because it does help pave the road to having quantum computers, which, like the original computers in the 50s and 60s, were these huge machines like the quantum computers are today, and were only available to the biggest tech companies like IBM originally. And eventually, over time, it took several decades, but we got from the big tech companies to the big universities to the small universities to the small companies. And then eventually we got to the PC revolution of Windows 95. And the headlines like this give encouragement that we are making the same kind of progress towards getting quantum computers in a PC quantum computer revolution, maybe in the next 20, 30, 40 years. So that would be truly unbelievable. But of course, there will be dystopian use cases that we at this moment can't only begin to imagine. Let's turn it to China for a minute. Yeah.
I guess I'd just say, Tyler, the main takeaway is that anybody involved in business, banking, etc., just start to look at getting your security upgraded to post-quantum safe stuff now. Not now today, but now this era, the next 10 years or so, because you don't want to be caught out by somebody behind closed doors coming up with something that can break your encryption. It's very easy to protect against, by the way. It's very cheap and easy. Just use a post-quantum safe system. I mean, it's easy to do, but just people are dragging their heels a little bit. It's probably too early to worry about it, but then it'll be slowly then all at once. It'll suddenly be too late. So.
Yeah. So just turning to China for a minute. Thank you for that, Ben. There's a theme that we mentioned briefly an hour or so ago about the Chinese tech giant founders laying low. Jack Ma and the CEO, the founders of TikTok and Pinduoduo, two of the biggest, fastest growing companies in history, are now laying low. And it's this new phrase. And it's even the South China Morning Post wrote an article this week about this new laying flat, to translate it very literally from the Chinese characters. People are laying flat, as they say. And Nikkei Japan wrote an article just now about China is watching the laying low people as a risk to their economy. And there's 5 things to know. Chinese youths reject the pressures of overworking and family as feudal. And China's retail sales in May, announced on Wednesday, increased 12% year over year, but came in below market expectations, as the increase was largely due to a rebound from a steep decline driven by COVID-19 pandemic, which, by the way, is my Twitter handle, steep decline, and no coincidence there. But
Yeah.
Why is that?
And my email and my Twitter account and all of my social media, and even my Clubhouse name is Steep Decline.
What a coincidence.
Yeah.
Why, Tyler?
Might have something to do with my proclivity for short selling, um, and having made a good living out of short selling companies that were trying to compete with technology companies. So the
Can I hop on real quick on
yeah,
laying
do
flat,
please
Tyler?
do. Yeah.
So half of I normally I go to NYU Shanghai, and half of the like they're intentional about the student population. Half of the population comes from the international like space, and of that half, about 30% comes from America. But the other half, they're deliberate about this, are Chinese nationals, and it's 1-to-1 international to Chinese. Um, and you get a roommate that is a Chinese national, and he's one of my closest friends in college for me. But not speaking to my roommate, but just the culture in general, the way that these kids have to get into like high tier colleges, they have to go through Gaokao and like other classes, other tests just to get into a good high school, to get into a good college. It's kind of like the Ivy League system, but on steroids, even worse than SATs. And by the time they get to college, they've had tests on tests on tests. Um, so they go two routes. They continue the test hustle, but based on this nature and or laying flat, they end up basically gaming and resting on the laurel of I made it to this good school. As long as I get the bare minimum, get my degree, I'm fine. So yeah, that's my insight that I wanted to
Okay.
quickly share.
Thanks for that. Speaking of China, this one from our friend Faraz Aramco, one of the biggest. Geez, how to even describe Aramco? It's a oil company from the Saudi Arabia kind of big energy company. Truly mind blowing. They were actually set to do the world's biggest IPO as well, if I recall correctly. Yeah. Aramco closes a $12 billion pipeline deal with China with a UAE backing. And it says, this is from Bloomberg, and thank you to Faraz, I just retweeted it. Silk Road Fund and Samsung Asset Management join. Saudi energy firm selling leasing rights over oil pipeline. China's Silk Road Fund, the consortium led by the EU, has now closed the deal, 49% equity stake in Aramco. The subsidiary,
You think they'll have some influence to use the digital yen for that, right?
indeed. Well, what's interesting about it is this, Cal. Uh,
As time goes on.
well, no. Here's something that the journalist might not even be aware of. That is incredibly relevant to why the Chinese are so interested in this and why they would pay such an incredible do such an incredible deal. It's because $12 billion for this pipeline deal is actually, I would argue, is a bargain, and here's why. Because the alternative is using oil tankers from the Middle East all the way around India, over the tip of Sumatra, around Singapore, all around, up to China. And that's a very long journey indeed that they have been doing for a very long time to get this oil out of the Middle East. And the problem is that those oil tankers are protected by America to do that. And America doesn't really like China so much anymore. And America may stop protecting those oil tankers, and China knows that. And 49% of China's energy is coming in the form of those oil tankers. And America could end China tomorrow if it so decided by stopping that flow of that oil. And China knows that. So now you understand why China is very interested in an oil pipeline with Aramco from the Middle East. So they basically so that the country doesn't end tomorrow. So you heard it here first. So other interesting headlines is what do we got here? China's cryptocurrency mining crackdown spreads to Sichuan. I think, Cheryl, you sent this one in. And this is related, of course, to our friend who will remain nameless because he DMs me and Cal and others the receipts and that predated the headlines. about China was going to be cracking down on cryptocurrency mining because he manages China's cryptocurrency mining, and he is personally responsible for bringing those miners out of Inner Mongolia to Texas, as has now recently been reported. But he was sending it to us with photos in our DMs even before the headlines. And now the headline, a week after the fact, as usual, from the Times of India, that China's cryptocurrency mining crackdown spreads to the Sichuan region. Other headlines about, now that we're on the, well, let's keep it on China for just one more headline. The Hong Kong court denies bail to Apple Daily's editor, Jimmy Lai. If you live in Hong Kong, you know Jimmy Lai, the rather brilliant billionaire who built Apple Daily, one of Hong Kong's loved tech publications. A very outspoken critic of the CCP, was arrested in his home, and the editor and publisher of Apple Daily newspaper were arraigned Saturday on charges under the city's sweeping national security law. They call it Editor-in-Chief Ryan Law. The newspaper's publisher-in-chief executive officer were denied bail, and their case was adjourned on August 13. Anyway, you can read the article, but the HK court denies bail to the Apple Daily's editor and publisher, and things don't look good for them for doing, I guess, something called free speech, which the Hong Kong publications are used to doing, but clearly are no longer allowed to do. And that's sort of the headline below the headline. No more free speech for you, Hong Kong. It was fun while it lasted. So Bitcoin isn't suitable as a real currency. El Salvador is making a mistake, is the headline from TNW, thenextweb.com. And going a little further, the president of El Salvador has got himself a pair of laser eyes on his Twitter account, and El Salvador's parliament passed the legislation just a week or so ago, after he had just announced, that they want to make Bitcoin legal tender in El Salvador. And it turns out it's not really suitable as a real currency, because the World Bank and the IMF and others are now saying they don't intend to help in his ambitious plans, and I suspect they will even try to work against his ambitious plans. So it's a developing story that we will watch very closely, because that could lead to kind of a resistance against the IMF and the World Bank, in the form of countries unifying under Bitcoin with their friends in El Salvador. To be continued, as they say.
Hey Tyler,
Yes, I may.
it's MA. 2 points, one to China, one to El Salvador.
Okay.
The one to China is very interesting because Mayor Suarez in Miami is trying to lure and entice and invite those Chinese miners to come and do mining in Miami, to move their companies to Miami, Florida.
Uh-huh.
And then on the El Salvador side, it's very interesting because there was, I did tweet out, or maybe I forgot, there is an article about the fact that there was a delivery all set to go out to El Salvador. I don't know I didn't remember the manufacturer, but of the Bitcoin ATMs. And they actually showed a picture of the supply and the order that is actually en route to El Salvador, right? Like literally it's getting ready to go, which means they're sending out, this company that creates Bitcoin ATMs are sending them to El Salvador. And they're super excited of being in a relationship with El Salvador. And I believe it's an American company.
How we do here at Tech News Around the World, and the Twitter account is TNATW. Speaking of crypto for a second, there's a headline from Forbes that says data reveals Bitcoin is braced for a short squeeze. And of course, anyone holding Bitcoins, that's music to their ears, that they believe people are now shorting Bitcoin because it has fallen in recent days. And Bitcoin traders and investors are still reeling from the steep sell-off that's wiped out $1 trillion from the combined cryptocurrency market. The Bitcoin price has crashed from almost 65,000 to now about 35,000. Now, an analysis of Bitcoin trading data has suggested the Bitcoin price could be hit by a so-called short squeeze when the price of the asset increases rapidly due to an excess of bets against it. So it will be very interesting to see if the Bitcoin holders manage to pull off a short squeeze, and that would be very interesting indeed. one last little or two more blockchain articles. There's now a blockchain-based two-factor authenticator service that is taking on Google. Centralized providers of two-factor authentication, that's Google. And what they mean by that is they ping your phone when you try and log into a website and they want to authenticate that it's you. They authenticate it by making sure that you are who you say you are by pinging your phone just to make sure. And so you get a little password on your phone. So, but Google's very centralized. So again, centralized providers of two-factor authentication services are being challenged by a brand new solution that is based on the blockchain. That's super interesting. A startup says it offers two-factor authentication on blockchain for the very first time. It's called Shield Protocol, taking on the likes of Google Authenticator and offers security while eliminating data collection and centralized storage. A simple interface also means it's a tool that will be accessible for everyday users. The project is based on Binance Smart Chain and is currently in the process of integrating with Polygon. It also offers a dedicated wallet where multiple cryptocurrency assets can be stored securely. Well, of course they could. And it's really interesting, actually. Now we know how they're monetizing it because it's a really cool feature and function of that really showcases in a very clever way one of the true benefits of the blockchain, which is kind of proving identity, to oversimplify it. Really good startup concept. And yeah, very interesting. Thank you to whoever shared that one. One last crypto one, and this is a big one, although not good news for the Bitcoin holders. Michael Burry, the star of The Big Short, who was the person who predicted the housing bubble in the U.S., which went international, and then was also the person who led the short squeeze on GameStop, and that also made international news on Wall Street. Is now back on Twitter. That was a headline a few days ago. He's now tweeting again. And one of his tweets, of course, will not make the Bitcoin crowd happy, saying that Bitcoin itself is a bit of a bubble, but that more importantly, all of retail, he says. Michael Burry warns retail traders about the mother of all crashes, he's calling it. The fund manager of The Big Short fame issued a stark series of tweets in the past few hours about cryptocurrencies and meme stocks. Michael Burry says, named after his winning bet against the mortgages as the star of The Big Short movie, issued a series of tweets on Thursday warning individuals about losses the size of countries in the event of crypto and meme stock declines. And here's a quote: all hype and speculation is doing is drawing in retail before the mother of all crashes, Barry wrote on Twitter before the post was deleted. When crypto falls from trillions or meme stocks fall from tens of billions, Main Street losses will approach the size of countries. History ain't changed, in summary. So,
There was also one from Mark Cuban, right?
Yeah, there was a lot of people are sending that one, and I don't think it's that important because Mark isn't really a real market mover shaker in
Yeah, the only
crypto.
thing
But
that,
yeah,
No.
yeah, Tyler, the only thing, Donna here, the only thing, I mean, Cuban got burned on a DeFi trade.
yeah,
He obviously didn't do his research, so now he says we need regulation. Well, that's nice. Okay, that was different when he was doing Dogecoin.
right. Yep.
Yep.
So the United Nations calls for a halt of weapons to Myanmar. The United Nations General Assembly on Friday called for a stop to the flow of arms to Myanmar and urged the military to respect November elections and release political detainees, including leader Aung San Suu Kyi. And this is an interesting one, and due to the magic of Clubhouse, we should ping in our friends from Myanmar, who's on the ground, although I don't see her in the list of people to ping in anymore, and that's concerning. I hope she's okay. But a little additional context, as I'm in Thailand and I have Burmese staff here. This headline concerns me personally, and just sharing my own little personal observation here, because what's happening lately is that there's now a resistance built. What's happened is, of course, there was a military coup, and who kind of took back power from the democratically elected government before it. And it was the previous military power who preceded the democratically elected parliament. And so, anyways, they're back. Many report with support from China, who was really the driving force behind it. I'll let you do your own homework on that. Although our friends from Myanmar came in this room and confirmed that. And then more interestingly, lately, now that the government has cracked down, established themselves as kind of back in power again, you're now starting to see lately, although not widely reported at all, I only know because I'm right across the street from it, is that there's now militias uprising to fight the military coup, the junta, and they are starting to win. And so the headline now that the UN is calling for a halt of weapons to Myanmar, I don't know if that's a good idea or not, because you have the citizens now rising up and kicking the asses of the military junta who took over their democracy. I don't know if halting the weapons at this point is a good idea or not, honestly. And it'll be very interesting to see how that develops in the next days to come. And I will keep you updated.
Ai's on stage now.
Oh, Ai's back. Fantastic.
Yeah, she's on stage.
Welcome. Listening only. We just read a headline. I would love your comment. And first of all, it's great to see you are able to join us here in Clubhouse.
Welcome back,
Welcome back indeed. And
Miss you.
the headline
Hope you're
says,
safe. I.
yeah, the headline says that the United Nations is asking to stop weapons from going into Myanmar. And I, just before you got here, was making the point that from what I've been hearing is that now citizens are creating militias to fight back against the military junta. So I'm hoping you can actually give us the real ground truth of what's really going on over there.
Yeah, it's been a long time that I haven't been here, because I've been not very much like following the news because it's very depressing and for the past a few months for me. Yeah, that is true that some of the citizens are having like honored up and like trying to fight back against the hunter, I may say. But is there like there is no such like centralized like armed forces for it from the citizen side yet. The Yeah, for the UN state announcements, I have just read it today. I think that is somewhat good for the for us, I might say, because what in everyday situation we can see those soldiers running around the street, going around the street with their guns in their hand, and they're also in even in the major city, Yangon city, which is the commercial city of Myanmar, having experienced like some bombs going around here and there within the city, especially most within this month. Today there was like a very big serious bombing things happen within near the UN office in Yangon. That was new. And I'm not quite sure whether that would the UN statement would be very helpful for the situations here in Myanmar, because we've been hoping some very good interventions from UN since the day of coup, but we haven't seen anything like affected until today. But I don't know how things goes around in the future as well. But I have I don't have much insight for that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you for the update. And just want to reiterate that it's great to see that you're here still and able to join us. And very sincere thanks for. I want to thank you in Clubhouse. What an absolute treat it is to be able to hear what's going on. How is the internet connectivity issues? Can you give us an update on that? Because last we spoke, clearly the military was still in the process of trying and successfully removing the internet and connectivity for people to be able to report on what was happening.
Yeah, for the internet issue, they turn on like 24/7 for starting from the May, I guess, as long as I remember. But but they only opened it for like whitelisted app kind of they ban it on like some of the websites. We still have to use the VPN for accessing the like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Also, a lot of it, a lot of the website, and even they ban it Wikipedia. Yeah, we still have to use the VPN for most of the site access, and they are like also closely monitoring the cash flow as well, because like people has been donating to some of the organizations around who is still doing the CDM movements, which is called civil disobedience movement, for the like the government officer who are still like protesting against the hunger. So they try to use that to block out like some of the like in the rural area. They don't know what is the VPN is, because like only like the specific people from the cities know how to use that though, so they're still trying to use that way. Yeah, for us if, as long as they are not banning any like VPNs, like the China did, we can still be access to the information with the help of VPN card. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you. Yeah. Yeah. Stay as long as you can. We appreciate you being here. Turning it to India for a second. India's Adani loses $13 billion in 4 days. Indian billionaire Gautam Adani's dream run up in the global wealth rankings is faltering after a media report raised questions about some offshore investors. The 58-year-old tycoon has lost more money this week than anyone else in the world. His personal fortune tumbled about $13 billion. Anyone have any additional insight on that? Or is it from the Indian perspective? I wonder why. I think one of our Indian listeners, sent this in. I was just curious if they had additional context on that. Rajiv, was that you who sent that in? I think Rajiv is sleeping, so we will. I think that was him, but we'll carry on.
Uh, but,
Go ahead, Rajiv.
I think his mic. Yeah.
yeah, which article again? I was awake. I was reading something.
Yeah, it says that India's Adani loses $13 billion.
I don't know if that was me who shared it.
Okay. We'll just move on with that one. Speaking of big billionaires, though, Elon Musk's Boring Company, where he drills holes under cities, tunnels, we should say, Boring Company reportedly pitching wider tunnels that could transport freight. So far, most of the company's efforts have been focused on passenger transport, and the Boring Company has been pitching potential clients on a much wider tunnel than any it has built so far, Bloomberg reporting, which could be used to transport freight. Since its inception in 2016, Elon Musk helmed startup has been focused on tunnels that would transport passengers with the goal to solve the problem of soul-destroying traffic. Somebody who lived in LA until recently, where he built a tunnel for himself to get to work. But the new pitch deck Bloomberg obtained shows how wider tunnels could be used for transporting freight, something that would greatly expand Boring's potential business. So that's clever. But in less happy news for Mr. Musk, Texas, his new residence, Texas official threatens SpaceX, his other company, with arrests over control of public roads. Cameron County District Attorney Luis Sanez wrote in a letter to SpaceX that the conduct is unacceptable. Authorities in Texas have reportedly accused SpaceX staff of attempting to block access to public roads around its property in Boca Chica and allegedly impersonating a public official. I happen to know a little bit about this. The letter additionally noted the Cameron County authorities have not given the company permission to shut down any roads. Impersonating a public official is a third-degree felony in Texas. And the secret little backstory here is that Tesla has an area where they launch SpaceX stuff, these big rockets. You might have heard of them. Anyway, Boca Chica is this tiny little shack town where SpaceX has been active in trying to acquire the whole town so that they can maintain secrecy over the launches of what that happened there and have a geographic barrier to kind of block out rogue spies amongst other crazy Elon Musk fans and a whole lot of other crazy UFO aficionados. So essentially what has happened here is that the SpaceX is being accused of impersonating police by stopping people from entering this little town of about 13 little shack houses, which again, SpaceX is willing to pay 5 times more than those houses are worth to get the local residents out so they can maintain the little area of Boca Chica. And impersonating officers is indeed a felony in Texas. Or impersonating any public official is a third-degree felony in Texas. And Texas just wrote them a letter to remind them of this fact, and no doubt we will see what happens. I imagine because this is now a legal issue. Well, here's another quote from the person who wrote the letter. While SpaceX is a valued member of our community, this does not authorize SpaceX, its employees, staff, agents, or contractors to disregard Texas law. Senez reportedly wrote. So, to be continued. Other interesting articles, speaking of like flight, somebody just sent in this really cool video that I'm now retweeting of the world's first electric flying race car has hit the skies ahead of the first racing series for the super fast crafts later this year. And you really have to see this tweet I just tweeted of a flying race car. It will blow your goddamn mind. I can't believe it's real. I can't believe I'm looking at this. It looks like a combination of a drone and a race car. It's a flying race car with 4 propellers like a drone. And apparently it goes very fast indeed. It's like it's a flying race car, or it's a drone in the shape of a race car that flies through the desert. It's quite wild. Take a look at the tweet I just twatted. Thank you for that.
What defines a car? I wonder.
Exactly. Is it a car anymore? It's a flying car is what it is. Maybe it's a preview of the Apple car. Google may be speaking of Apple, Google may be working on an answer to Apple's device locating network, the AirTag. And we covered this story a few days ago when it first broke, and somebody just tweeted it in again, and it bears repeating that the Apple AirTag is catching a lot of people's interest, and so Google has taken note and they plan to copy it. And it's as simple as that, folks. And I can assure you Facebook will likely do the same, other tech companies will do the same, but you'll need it to partner with your smartphone so that you can track down that device. But I imagine the trackability of things is also a huge megatrend, which, by the way, very soon all of your e-commerce packages in the not so distant future will also be trackable. And to that point, we had a headline yesterday or 2 days ago that showed a very futuristic, autonomous, self-driving FedEx vehicle that no doubt you can watch arrive to your house like an Uber vehicle does. And when it gets to your house, it alerts you that it's arrived. You walk out to the vehicle, you type in the code that you were sent via SMS, and boom, the doors open and you get your package out of this self-driving delivery truck. Quite genius indeed. We're definitely making
Tyler, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Harry.
Is this RIP Tile? Is Tile dead?
No, Tile is one of the main players in the very big lawsuit against Apple's kind of monopoly. So it was basically Tile, Spotify, Match.com, but very notably Epic. And Epic got all of the headlines. They were really leading this court case in Washington, D.C. about it was one of the most high profile cases of the year, where a lot of these high profile tech companies are all joining together to try and drive awareness of Apple playing unfair and charging a 30% tax. And Epic Games, which runs Fortnite and other, I mean, that's just one of many things they have. And Spotify is also accusing Apple of playing unfair with Apple Music and how it deals with Spotify on their app, which they have a very good argument to make. Match.com as well, and Tile. And for the reason that Tile does not have equal access, and it's not an equal playing field to compete with Apple AirTags inside of the Apple iPhone. So Tile was letting the DC politicians understand what's going on. And so the outcome of that is all expected next week on Wednesday, in some sense, because there's now a big effort in Washington, D.C. to crack down on Apple very notably. So we'll see how that shakes out. A hacker is being reported by NBC News now that 50,000 security disasters are waiting to happen. If you thought all of the ransomware attacks were getting out of hand, well, it just got a little worse. If you can imagine a community center run by two old guys who are plumbers, that's your average water plant, one cybersecurity consultant said. And on January 15th, a hacker tried to poison a water treatment plant that served parts of the San Francisco Bay Area. It didn't seem hard. The hackers had the username and password for the former employees' accounts, and which let them control the computers, according to a private report compiled by Northern California Regional Intelligence Center and seen by NBC News. After logging in, the hacker deleted programs that the water plant used to treat drinking water. And so this is a very concerning situation indeed. So I tweeted that out, and thank you to whoever tweeted that in. On a similar note, researchers find biological links between red meat and colorectal cancers. And I believe it was Kieran who sent this one in. Was it Kieran? Or if you're still with us, eating less red meat
Yes.
is standard medical advice for preventing colorectal cancer, but the way it causes cells to mutate has remained unclear, and not all experts were convinced that there was a strong link. A new paper in the Journal of Cancer Discovery has now identified specific patterns of DNA damage triggered by diets rich in red meat, further implicating the food as a carcinogen while heralding the possibility of detecting the cancer early and designing new treatments. You can read that article yourself rather than debating your friends here on stage about it. Let's all get informed about what this study is really all about. And no doubt there's some carnivore friends who will want to debate this, but let's look at the research paper in full before expressing our uninformed opinions. Other interesting related issue, Coca-Cola. Internal documents reveal efforts to sell Coca-Cola to teens despite obesity crisis. Obesity rates for children were soaring at a time when Coke aimed to cement credibility in the health and well-being space. Coca-Cola has sponsored the Olympic Games since 1928, the longest-standing brand partner and one that has helped many national Olympic committees send athletes to compete. So says the beginning of a Coca-Cola internal document and global request for proposal for a public relations campaign for the 2016 Games in Rio de Janeiro. The budget, $1.5 million to $2.5 million. Among the target audience, teens and moms. The new paper in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health this week found that the Coca-Cola Company PR goals include trying to shift teens' sense of health impacts of drinking sugary sodas. And you can go on to read that one yourself, but it's not looking good for Coke, especially in more recent headlines around soccer stars in I believe it was Ronaldo who came out and said drink water as a comment about drinking Coke or soda or not, and I believe that sent Coke prices down.
$5 billion, yeah. $5 billion market share loss in a second or something like that.
Yeah, wild. I wish he would tell me next time he does something like that. Yeah.
Tyler,
yes,
you
John.
primed us in the Politics Room 101 You mentioned Korea, South Korea, and sex, and I think that's why Justin stayed so long in the room. Did you ever get to that one?
No, we didn't, but we will get to that next. Let's save that one for next time. And I do have some more headlines, but we're now 12 minutes over after a very nice 3-hour session here. Thank you to everybody for helping us yet again. Another very fun tech news around the world. Playing us out is my friend Anderson Paak with his song
Yay.
Tints.
Also, Tyler.
Yes.
Quick clarifying question.
Yes.
You just said check the tweet I just twatted. Is it twatted or twote?
Both. It depends if you're UK or American. It's one of those things. With the U or not the U, Yeah.
I learned a lot today. Thanks, Tyler.
It's been fun. Thank you, everybody. Have a fantastic weekend.
You.
We will meet tomorrow here at the same time, but follow the Twitter account if you want to see when we go live on other platforms like the Spotify Green Room or the Twitter Spaces, which we are testing out from time to time. And the Twitter
What's
account
the Twitter account again,
TNATW. Tech news around the world.
That's just odd.